The town that looked away. The 8-year-old girl collapsed beside the well at noon, her empty bucket clattering across sun-baked earth. From every window on Main Street, curtains twitched. Doors remained locked. In rural Montana, some families you helped, and some you didn't. The Harpers had been marked since the day Thomas Harper's body was pulled from that same well 18 months ago. Accident, the judge had ruled, though his daughter swore otherwise. No one believed a child, no one intervened, until a drifter named Ethan Cole saw what this town had become, and made the choice that would shatter everything. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Lily's story travels. Hit that like button and stay until the end, because what starts with a town's silence ends with a reckoning no one saw coming. The heat rose in waves from the Montana dirt, turning the air itself into something you could taste, bitter and metallic, like old pennies left in the sun. Ethan Cole stood on the ridge outside town, his horse cropping dry grass behind him, and watched the girl fall. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old. One moment she was hauling a bucket from the public well, her thin arms straining against the weight. The next, her knees buckled and she went down hard, the bucket spinning away across the packed earth, water darkening the dust in a spreading stain that would be gone in minutes. Ethan's gut clenched. He'd seen a lot of things in 32 years, more than he wanted to remember. But watching a child collapse from heat and hunger while a whole town pretended not to notice hit different. Because that's exactly what was happening. From his vantage point, Ethan could see Main Street clear as Sunday. Mrs. Brennan's curtains moved at the Mercantile. The blacksmith's door stood half open, and Ethan could make out a silhouette just inside, watching. At the boarding house, 2 women on the porch froze mid-conversation, teacups raised, eyes fixed on the scene at the well. Nobody moved. The girl lay there in the dust, her faded calico dress spread around her like wilted petals. Her dark hair stuck to her face with sweat. Her chest rose and fell, shallow breaths Ethan could barely see from this distance. But she didn't get up, and nobody went to her. "The hell is wrong with these people?" Ethan muttered, already moving. His boots found purchase on the rocky slope, and he half ran, half slid down the hillside, stones skittering ahead of him. His horse whinnied protest, but he ignored it, focused on that small figure sprawled by the well. By the time he hit level ground and crossed the 50 yards to Main Street, he was breathing hard, dust coating his throat. He dropped to his knees beside the girl, his shadow falling across her face. Hey, can you hear me?" Up close she looked even worse. Her skin was papery dry, her lips cracked and bleeding at the corners. Dark circles ringed her eyes like bruises. When he touched her forehead, her skin burned against his palm, but not with fever. This was heat exhaustion, dehydration, probably hunger, too. This was a child who hadn't had enough of anything in too damn long. He glanced up at the row of buildings. More curtains had moved. He counted at least a dozen people who could see him, who could see this child lying in the dirt. Not one of them stepped outside. Something cold settled in Ethan's chest, something that felt like the moment before violence, before everything changed. He'd felt it before, in a Kansas rail yard 6 years ago, watching deputies beat a man to death while the town looked on. He'd felt it in a Colorado mining camp when the company men came for the union organizers and nobody spoke up. He'd felt it the day of his own daughter. He shut that thought down hard and fast, focusing on what was in front of him. The girl's eyes fluttered open. They were gray, he noticed. Light gray like creek water over stones, and completely lucid despite her condition. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Her voice was barely there. "Mama said, don't be trouble." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You're not trouble, honey. Just hold on." He scooped her up. Christ, she weighed almost nothing, and turned toward the closest building, the Mercantile. Through the window, he could see Mrs. Brennan standing well back from the glass now, her arms crossed, her face set in an expression Ethan recognized. Fear, maybe. Or guilt wearing fear's mask. He kicked the door open hard enough that the bell above it shrieked. Mrs. Brennan jumped. "We're closed." "Like hell you are." Ethan's voice came out flat, dangerous. "This child needs water. Now." "The Harpers aren't... We don't..." She stopped, her eyes darting to the back room. "You should take her home. That's not our concern." "Where's home?" "The old Harper place. 3 miles north, up Canyon Road. But mister, you don't understand." I understand a child collapsed in your street and you watched it happen. Ethan shifted the girl's weight, feeling how her head lolled against his shoulder. I understand you got water and shade and you're choosing not to share it. That understanding enough for you? Mrs. Brennan's face flushed red. For a moment he thought she might actually refuse outright, might tell him to get out. Instead, she grabbed a tin cup from behind the counter, filled it from a pitcher with shaking hands, and thrust it toward him. Thank you. He meant it to sound grateful, but it came out hard-edged anyway. The girl drank in small sips, her throat working. Some of the water ran down her chin, but her eyes cleared a little, focused on his face. What's your name? He asked quietly. Lily. She pulled back from the cup, catching her breath. Lily Harper. Harper. He'd heard that name somewhere, though he couldn't place where. Ethan had only been in this territory 3 days, drifting south from the Canadian border, trying to stay ahead of memories that followed him like wolves. Lily's a good name. I'm Ethan Cole. Can you tell me where you live, your mama expecting you back? The farmhouse, north. Lily's eyes slid past him to Mrs. Brennan, and something shuddered in her expression. I can walk. I'm sorry for the trouble. You already said that, and you already got my answer. Ethan straightened, still holding her. To Mrs. Brennan, I'm taking her home. If anyone gives a damn, that's where I'll be. He walked out without waiting for a response. Behind him, he heard the boarding house door open, heard whispers start up like wind through dry grass. He didn't look back. Canyon Road turned out to be more of a suggestion than an actual road, 2 wagon ruts cutting through scrub grass and sage, winding between rocky outcrops that threw hard shadows in the afternoon sun. His horse had followed him down from the ridge, trailing behind with the long-suffering patience of an animal used to its rider's impulsive decisions. Ethan settled Lily in the saddle and walked alongside, one hand on her knee to steady her. She didn't speak, just sat there with her hands twisted in the saddle horn, her eyes fixed on the horizon. This happen a lot? He asked after a while. You having to go into town for water? Well's dry at home, has been since... She stopped. Since when? Since Papa died, 1.5 years ago. There it was, the name clicking into place. He'd heard it at the saloon 2 nights back. Some men talking in low voices about the Harper situation, about the widow and her girl, about property that would come up for sale soon enough if things went the way they were heading. How'd your papa die, Lily? She was quiet so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, they said he fell in the well, said it was an accident. But you don't think so. I know it wasn't. Her voice went hard, older than 8 years had any right to sound. I saw what happened. I told everyone, but nobody believed me. Nobody ever believes me. Ethan's hand tightened on the saddle. I'm listening now. What did you see? The man in the nice coat. He pushed Papa. I was in the barn loft. I saw it all. Papa was checking the well pump, and the man came up behind him and shoved him in. Papa screamed. I heard the splash. The man looked around real careful, making sure nobody saw, and then he left. Just walked away like nothing happened. A chill ran down Ethan's spine despite the heat. You tell the sheriff this? Sheriff said I was confused, said I was upset and my memory was playing tricks. Judge Edwards said... She stopped again, her small face going tight. What did the judge say? Said children don't make reliable witnesses. Said grief makes people see things that aren't there. Said Papa's death was a tragic accident and the family should accept it and move on. Judge Edwards. The name hung in the air like smoke. Ethan had heard that name too, back at the saloon. The territorial judge who'd been in Silver Creek for 15 years, who owned half the buildings on Main Street and most of the land around it. The kind of man people either worked for or worked around, but never worked against. This judge, Ethan said carefully. You wear a nice coat? Lily looked at him sharp, her gray eyes suddenly fierce. You believe me. It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. Yeah, honey, I believe you. The farmhouse came into view around a bend, a weathered structure that had seen better decades, its paint long gone to gray wood, its porch sagging like a tired spine. The barn beside it leaned at an angle that suggested one good wind might finish what time had started. The fields that should have been green with summer crops were brown and dead, choked with weeds. But someone had tried. Ethan could see that in the small vegetable garden near the house, in the mended fence posts, in the laundry hanging stiff on the line. Someone was fighting to keep this place alive with everything they had. The front door opened as they approached, and a woman stepped onto the porch. She was thin, not starved like Lily, but getting there, with dark hair pulled back severe and a face that might have been beautiful before exhaustion carved it down to angles. Her dress was clean but patched in a dozen places, her hands raw and red from work. She couldn't have been more than 30, but her eyes were older. Those eyes went wide when she saw Lily in the saddle. "Lily!" She was down the porch steps in a heartbeat, reaching up. "Baby, what happened? Are you hurt?" "She collapsed at the town well," Ethan said, swinging down and lifting Lily into her mother's arms. "Heat exhaustion, dehydration. She needs water, shade, and food if you have it." The woman's face went through a complicated series of expressions: fear, shame, anger, something that might have been gratitude if it wasn't so weighted down with suspicion. "Who are you?" "Ethan Cole. I was passing through, saw her fall. Thought she could use some help." "And the town, what did they—" She stopped, reading the answer in his silence. "Of course. Thank you for bringing her home, Mr. Cole. We're fine now." It was a dismissal, polite but firm. Ethan should have taken it. Should have climbed back on his horse and ridden away from whatever darkness had settled over this place like a shroud. Instead, he said, "Ma'am, when's the last time you or your daughter had a proper meal?" Her spine went rigid. "That's not your concern. Well's dry, fields are dead, and I'm guessing you haven't been able to get credit at any of the stores in town. How long you been trying to keep this place running on your own?" "Mr. Cole." "Mama, he knows." Lily's voice was muffled against her mother's shoulder. "He believes me about Papa." The woman went very still. When she looked at Ethan again, something had shifted in her expression, a desperate kind of hope mixed with terror. "You should go. It's not safe here, for any of us." "Funny thing about that," Ethan said quietly. "I stopped worrying about safe a long time ago. Name's Marion, isn't it? Marion Harper?" She nodded, wary. "Here's what I think, Marion. I think your husband saw something or knew something that made him inconvenient to some powerful people. I think they killed him and made it look like an accident. I think they've been squeezing you and Lily ever since, waiting for you to break, waiting for you to give up this land and walk away." "How close am I?" Marion's eyes shone with sudden tears. She blinked back hard. "Close enough. But it doesn't matter what you think or what I think or what Lily saw. There's no proof. Thomas is dead, the well is poisoned, and we're out of time. By end of summer, the bank forecloses and Judge Edwards gets what he wanted all along." "What's that?" "Our land. Water rights to the spring that feeds into Silver Creek. Control of the whole valley north of town." She shifted Lily's weight on her hip. "Thomas figured it out 6 months before he died. Started asking questions, looking at land deeds and property transfers. He found a pattern, families losing their farms, all of them ending up in Edwards' hands, all of them with water access. He was going to file a complaint with the territorial governor. Instead, he ended up at the bottom of our well." The pieces were falling into place now, the picture getting clearer and uglier. A land grab disguised as business, murder disguised as accident, a whole town scared into silence. "You have any of that evidence? The deeds? The pattern he found?" Marion hesitated. "Thomas hid it. Said if anything happened to him, I should get it to the authorities. But I don't know who to trust, and I can't leave Lily alone, and every time I think about riding to the territorial capital—" Her voice broke. "I'm afraid, Mr. Cole. I'm afraid they'll kill me too. And then what happens to my daughter?" Ethan looked at Lily, at her solemn gray eyes watching him like she was measuring whether he was the kind of man who kept his word or the kind who broke it. He'd been both kinds, at different points in his life. After Sarah and Emma died, his wife and daughter, taken by fever while he was away chasing outlaws, he couldn't even remember anymore. He'd been the breaking kind for a long time. Drinking kind, drifting kind, the kind who walked away from everything because staying hurt too much. But standing here in the dusty yard of this failing farm, looking at a child who'd watched her father murdered and a mother trying to protect her with nothing but will and desperation, Ethan felt something shift inside him. Something that had been frozen for 6 years starting to thaw, painful as frostbite warming. "Show me where he hit it," he said. Marion stared at him. "Why would you? You don't even know us. This isn't your fight." "Maybe not, but it's a fight someone needs to take on, and right now I'm the only someone volunteering." He met her eyes. "I was a lawman once, long time ago, before I was something else. I know how to read evidence. I know how to get it to people who can act on it, and I've got nothing waiting for me anywhere else." "You could die." "We're all dying, Marion. Question is what we do with the time we've got." He glanced at Lily again. "Your girl's brave. She told the truth when it would have been easier to stay quiet. Seems to me she deserves to see that truth mean something." Marion's face crumpled for just a second, all the fear and exhaustion breaking through. Then she pulled herself together, that iron will reasserting itself. "All right. Lily, go inside and lie down. Mr. Cole, come with me." She led him to the barn, to a loose board in the loft floor. Underneath, wrapped in oilcloth, was a leather satchel. Inside were land deeds going back 20 years. Property transfers, all signed by Judge Edwards or his associates. Letters between Edwards and men in the Territorial Land Office. A map with parcels marked in red ink showing a clear pattern. A systematic acquisition of every water source in the valley, every spring and creek access, every well. Dozens of families displaced, their land absorbed into Edwards's growing empire. "Jesus," Ethan breathed. Marion, this is enough to bring down half the territorial government." "I know." Her voice was hollow. "Thomas died for it. I've been too afraid to do anything with it. What if I send it to the wrong person? What if Edwards has people everywhere? What if we make copies first? Send them to multiple places. Territorial governor, federal marshal, newspapers in Denver and Chicago. Scatter it wide enough that Edwards can't contain it." Ethan looked up from the documents. "It'll take time. We'd need to stay here, make it look like nothing's changed. Can you do that? Can I keep pretending to be the grieving widow slowly losing her farm while you work behind the scenes?" Marion's laugh was bitter. "I've been doing that for 18 months, Mr. Cole. I can do it a while longer, if you're sure." "I'm sure." She studied him for a long moment, this stranger who'd run down a hill to help her daughter when no one else would. "Why? Really why?" Ethan looked down at the documents in his hands, at the evidence of Thomas Harper's murder and a dozen other injustices. He thought about Sarah and Emma, about how he'd been too late to save them, too lost in his own ambition and duty to be there when they needed him most. "Because someone should have helped my family when they needed it," he said quietly, "and nobody did. So maybe this is me trying to balance the scales. Or maybe I'm just tired of walking away. Either way, I'm here now. If you'll have me." Marion nodded slowly. "Then I guess you're staying, Mr. Cole." "Ethan, if we're going to be fighting judges and land barons together, might as well use first names." "Marion." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "Welcome to the Harper farm, Ethan. It's not much, but it's ours. At least until the bank says otherwise." They walked back to the house together, the afternoon sun beating down like a hammer on an anvil. Inside, Lily was already asleep on a narrow bed, her breathing steady now, her face peaceful in a way that broke Ethan's heart a little. Marion touched her daughter's forehead gently. "She's cooler now. Thank you for everything." "Don't thank me yet. We've got a lot of work ahead of us." "I know." She looked at him, this worn-down woman with steel in her spine. "But for the first time since Thomas died, I feel like maybe we have a chance, even if it's a small one." Ethan wanted to tell her they had more than a chance, wanted to promise her that justice would prevail, that the bad guys would lose, that everything would work out the way it should. But he'd been alive long enough to know better than to make promises he couldn't keep. Instead, he said, "We'll start tomorrow. Tonight you both rest. I'll take care of the horse, check the property, make myself useful." Outside, the sun was starting its slow descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The kind of sunset that in another life, Ethan might have appreciated for its beauty. Now he just saw how the light caught on the dead fields, on the sagging barn, on the poisoned well that had claimed Thomas Harper's life. He saw the shadows growing longer, the darkness coming on, and he wondered what other secrets this land held. In town, Judge Edwards would be finishing his afternoon session, retiring to his office above the courthouse where he kept his files and his ledgers and his careful accounting of all the lives he'd destroyed in the name of progress and profit. He wouldn't know yet that Ethan Cole existed. Wouldn't know that the drifter who'd carried Lily Harper home was about to become the biggest threat to everything he'd built. But he'd learn. They always did, eventually. Ethan unsaddled his horse and rubbed him down, talking to the animal in low tones. The horse listened, patient as always, while Ethan explained what they'd gotten themselves into. Probably stupid, he admitted. Probably going to get us both killed, but that little girl in there deserves better than this. They both do. So we're staying, at least until we see this through. The horse snorted, shook his mane. Yeah, I know, but someone's got to do it. Might as well be us. Inside the house, a lamp flickered to life in the window. Ethan could see Marion moving around, checking on Lily, preparing something that might pass for supper from whatever stores they had left. She was strong. He could see that already. The kind of strength that came from losing everything and still getting up every morning, still fighting even when the fight seemed hopeless. Thomas Harper had been a lucky man, and Judge Edwards was about to become a very unlucky one. Ethan smiled, slow and cold. It had been a long time since he'd felt this focused, this certain of his purpose. Maybe it was dangerous. Maybe it was the first step toward getting himself killed. But damn if it didn't feel right. In the barn loft, the leather satchel waited in its hiding place, full of secrets and evidence and the truth that Thomas Harper had died to uncover. Tomorrow, they'd start making copies. Tomorrow, they'd begin the careful work of exposing corruption that ran deep as old roots. But tonight, in this failing farm at the edge of a town that had forgotten how to be decent, 3 people, 2 strangers and 1 child, had found something worth fighting for. And in the morning, when the sun rose harsh and unforgiving over the Montana landscape, the real work would begin. The first 3 days passed in a rhythm of careful normalcy. Ethan slept in the barn, rose before dawn to mend fences that had been slowly collapsing, and made himself visible enough that anyone watching from town would see a drifter earning his keep before moving on. Marion kept to her routines, washing, mending, tending the struggling vegetable garden, while Lily stayed close to the house, her gray eyes tracking everything with that unsettling awareness children developed when they learned too young that the world was dangerous. At night, after Lily fell asleep, Ethan and Marion worked by lamplight at the kitchen table, copying Thomas Harper's documents page by painstaking page. Ethan's handwriting was rough but legible, shaped by years of writing reports in sheriff's offices across 3 territories. Marion's hand was steadier, more practiced, each letter carefully formed. He was meticulous, Marion said on the 3rd night, her finger tracing a column of dates on one of the original deeds. Thomas kept records of everything, every conversation, every transaction he could verify. He talked to families who'd lost their land, got them to tell him what really happened. This one here, she tapped a page. The Johnsons. They had a spring on their property that fed into Silver Creek. Edwards wanted it. When they wouldn't sell, their barn burned down. 2 weeks later, their eldest son got arrested for stealing horses he'd never touched. By the time they proved his innocence, they'd lost the farm paying legal fees. Ethan studied the neat rows of information, the pattern emerging like a photograph developing in chemical bath. How many families total? 17 that Thomas documented, probably more he didn't get to. She set down her pen, rubbed her eyes. He started noticing it about 2 years before he died. Small things at first, good people suddenly leaving town, land changing hands under strange circumstances. Then he met Jacob Miller at the saloon. Jacob was drunk, broken, talking about how he'd lost everything and nobody would believe him about Edwards. Thomas believed him, started digging. And Edwards found out. Must have. Thomas was careful, but her voice caught. The night before he died, he told me he was close to having enough evidence. Said he'd ride to Helena within the week, get it to the territorial governor. He seemed excited, hopeful. The next morning, Lily found him in the well. The lamp flickered, casting shadows that made Marion's face look older, harder. Outside, cicadas sang their endless summer song, punctuated by the occasional cry of a night bird hunting in the darkness. "Tell me about Lily," Ethan said quietly. "How's she doing? Really doing?" Marion's expression softened and broke at the same time. She's strong, stronger than any child should have to be. But she has nightmares. Wakes up screaming about men in nice coats, about wells and falling. Some nights she crawls into bed with me and I can feel her shaking, trying so hard not to cry because she thinks she needs to be brave for me. She pressed her palms against the table, steadying herself. She used to love going to town, had friends at school, played with the other children. Now she won't go unless she has to, and when she does, she watches everyone like they might hurt her. An 8-year-old girl shouldn't have to live like that. No, Ethan agreed. She shouldn't. They worked in silence for a while, the scratch of pen on paper the only sound besides the night settling around the farmhouse. Ethan found himself watching Marion when she wasn't looking, the way she bit her lower lip when concentrating, the way her shoulders curved forward from exhaustion and worry, the way she occasionally touched the thin gold band still on her left hand, turning it absently. She caught him looking once and raised an eyebrow. What? Just thinking you're holding up better than most people would. Don't have much choice, do I? Lily needs me. This farm needs me. Thomas needs... She stopped, corrected herself. Thomas needed me to finish what he started. So that's what I'm doing. Still, it's not easy. Nothing worth doing ever is. She dipped her pen in ink, returned to copying. You'd know that, I suppose, being a lawman before. Former lawman. There's a difference. What made you stop? The question hung between them, too direct to dodge, too personal to answer easily. Ethan set down his own pen, stared at the papers in front of him without really seeing them. I had a wife, Sarah, and a daughter, Emma. She was 4. The words came out flat, practiced, like he'd told this story enough times that it had worn smooth. I was a deputy marshal in Kansas, gone more than I was home, chasing outlaws and bank robbers and telling myself I was making the world safer. While I was off playing hero, fever came through our town, cholera. Sarah and Emma both got sick. By the time I got the telegram and rode home, they'd been dead 3 days. Marion's hand stilled on the paper. Ethan, I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry, doesn't change anything. He picked up his pen again, needing something to do with his hands. I stayed on for another year, tried to keep working, but everything felt hollow. What was the point of catching criminals when I couldn't save my own family? So I quit, started drifting, been doing that for 6 years now, moving from place to place, picking up work where I could find it, never staying anywhere long enough to care, Marion finished softly. Yeah, to care. He met her eyes across the table. Until 3 days ago, when I saw your daughter collapse in the street and a whole town turn their backs on her. Something about that it broke something open that I'd kept closed for a long time. Or fix something, Marion suggested. Maybe you needed to find something worth caring about again. Before Ethan could respond, a sound cut through the night. Hoofbeats, multiple riders, coming fast up Canyon Road. They both froze, listening. Marion's face went pale in the lamplight. Edward's men, she whispered. They come sometimes. Check to make sure we're still here, still suffering. Thomas called them the judge's dogs. Ethan was already moving, gathering the copied documents and the originals, shoving them back into the oilcloth wrapping. Get these to the loft, now. I'll handle whoever's out there. Marion grabbed the bundle and disappeared up the ladder to the sleeping loft where Lily lay curled beneath a thin quilt. Ethan stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind him, his hand resting easy on the gun at his hip. A Colt Peacemaker he'd carried for 15 years, through more trouble than he cared to count. 3 riders emerged from the darkness into the yard, their horses blowing hard from the ride. The lead man was tall and thick through the shoulders, wearing a deputy's star that caught the moonlight. The other 2 were ranch hands by the look of them, hard men with harder eyes. Evening, the deputy said, not bothering with pleasantry. You'd be the drifter who carried the Harper girl home a few days back. That'd be me, Ethan Cole. Deputy Frank Warren. These are associates of mine. We're here on behalf of Judge Edwards, checking on the welfare of Widow Harper and her child. Awful late for a welfare check. Warren's smile had no warmth in it. We work when the judge tells us to work. Where's Mrs. Harper? Inside. Asleep. Along with her daughter. I'd appreciate you not disturbing them. You work here now, Cole? Helping out. Mrs. Harper's short-handed, case you hadn't noticed. We noticed. Question is, what's a drifter doing settling in at a failing farm? Usually men like you keep moving, unless you found something worth staying for. Warren leaned forward in his saddle. Or someone. The implication was clear and deliberately insulting. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. I found a family that needed help. That a crime in Montana? Depends on the help. Judge Edwards, he's concerned about Mrs. Harper. Concerned she might be making poor decisions in her grief. Taking up with strangers, for instance. Might be he needs to ensure the child's being properly cared for. Ice slid down Ethan's spine. You threatening to take that girl from her mother? Threatening? No, sir. Just mentioning that the judge takes his responsibility to this community seriously. Widows and orphans fall under his protection, you might say. And if he determines that a child's welfare is at risk, her welfare's fine. Better than it was before I got here. That's a matter of opinion. Warren straightened in his saddle. Here's some friendly advice, Cole. You seem like a reasonable man. This situation here, it's complicated. Got history you don't know about. Best thing you could do is saddle up and ride on. Find another place to play Good Samaritan. This farm's going to be sold soon enough anyway. Bank's got papers drawn up already. Come September, Judge Edwards takes possession of the property, and Mrs. Harper gets relocated somewhere more suitable for a woman in her position. What if she doesn't want to be relocated? Won't be her choice to make. Warren's voice hardened. Look, Cole, I'm being straight with you because you're new to this territory and might not understand how things work here. Judge Edwards runs Silver Creek. He's been good for this town. Brought in business, kept the peace, made sure people prosper if they work with him instead of against him. The Harpers, they chose to work against him. That was their mistake. Don't make it yours. Behind Ethan, he heard the soft creak of the door opening. Marion stepped onto the porch, her face composed, but her hands trembling slightly at her sides. Deputy Warren, she said coldly, I believe Mr. Cole asked you a question. What happens if I don't want to leave my home? Warren sighed like she was a difficult child. Mrs. Harper, we've had this conversation before. You can't maintain this property alone. The well's poisoned, the fields are dead, and you got no money to fix either problem. Judge Edwards is offering you a way out, a generous price for the land, enough to set you and Lily up in a boarding house in town until you can find work or remarry. It's a good deal. You should take it. This is my home. My husband's home, our daughter's home. Your husband's dead, ma'am. And he died because he was stubborn and stupid, sticking his nose where it didn't belong. Don't make the same mistake. Marion's composure cracked. Thomas died because someone murdered him. Someone who wanted this land and was willing to kill for it. And everyone in this town knows it, but you're all too afraid to... Careful. Warren's voice dropped to something dangerous. You're treading on slander there, Mrs. Harper. Making accusations against a territorial judge without proof is a serious matter. Could get you in real trouble. I have proof, Marion said, and Ethan's heart nearly stopped. My husband documented everything, every illegal land transfer, every family you people destroyed. And one day, someone's going to see it, and... Ethan stepped between them, cutting her off. She's tired, upset, not thinking clearly. Right, Marion? He turned to look at her, willing her to understand. Her eyes were bright with fury and tears, but she read his expression and stepped back, nodding tightly. Right. I'm tired. Warren studied them both for a long moment. Thomas Harper claimed a lot of things before he died. Paranoid delusions, mostly. If he left any so-called evidence behind, I'd be happy to collect it. For safekeeping. There's nothing to collect, Ethan said flatly. Man's been dead 18 months. Anything he had is long gone. Maybe. Maybe not. Warren gathered his reins. Either way, clock's ticking. You got until September 1st. After that, this property belongs to Judge Edwards by legal right of foreclosure. You want to make trouble between now and then, that's your choice. But trouble has a way of finding people out here. Accidents happen. Wells get poisoned. Barns catch fire. Children get lost in the wilderness and never found. The threat was naked now, undisguised. One of the ranch hands grinned, showing gaps where teeth should have been. Ethan's hand drifted toward his gun, subtle but intentional. You're making threats against a child in front of witnesses. That's bold. Witnesses? Warren laughed. Who's going to believe a drifter and a widow who everyone knows is half crazy with grief? You go ahead and tell your story, Cole. See who listens. He yanked his horse's head around. Enjoy the farm while you got it. Come September, you'll be moving on one way or another. The easy way or the hard way, that's up to you. They rode out the way they came, hoofbeats fading into darkness, leaving behind the smell of dust and horse sweat and violence barely restrained. Marion sagged against the porch post. Ethan caught her elbow, steadying her. I'm sorry, she whispered. I shouldn't have said anything about the evidence. When he talked about Thomas that way, like he was crazy, like he deserved to die. It's all right. But from now on, we keep the evidence secret. Nobody can know we have it, not until we're ready to use it. Do you think they suspect? Hard to say. Warren's fishing, but he doesn't know for sure. Ethan looked toward town, toward the lights still burning in some windows despite the late hour. We need to move faster. Get those copies finished and sent out before Edwards makes his next move. What do you think that'll be? Same thing it's been all along. Pressure, intimidation, making your life miserable until you give up and leave. He turned back to her. Question is, how far is he willing to go? Warren mentioned accidents. I don't think that was idle talk. Marion's face hardened. Then we'd better make sure we're ready when he comes. Thomas taught me to shoot. I'm not helpless. Never thought you were. Ethan managed a small smile. But maybe we should make some preparations anyway, just in case. They spent the next hour moving supplies, food, water, ammunition, to strategic locations around the property. The barn loft, a root cellar behind the house, a natural cave in the rocks about 100 yards north where someone could hide if things went truly bad. When they finally returned to the house, Lily was awake, sitting on the edge of her bed with her knees drawn up, her eyes huge in the lamplight. I heard the men, she said. They're going to hurt us, aren't they? Marion sat beside her, wrapped an arm around her thin shoulders. Not if we're smart and careful and stick together. Papa was smart and careful. They hurt him anyway. The simple truth of it silenced them all for a moment. Then Ethan crouched down in front of Lily, bringing himself to her eye level. Your papa was brave, he said quietly. He stood up for what was right, even though it was dangerous. And yeah, bad people hurt him because of it. But you know what? He still won, because he found the truth, and he wrote it down, and he hid it where they couldn't destroy it. And now we're going to make sure that truth gets out there, gets seen by people who can do something about it. Your papa's going to have the last word, Lily. I promise you that. You promise we won't die? Ethan wanted to make that promise. Wanted to tell this frightened child that everything would be fine, that good always triumphed over evil, that justice would prevail. But he'd learned the hard way that promises you couldn't keep were worse than no promises at all. I promise I'll do everything I can to keep you and your mama safe. I promise I won't quit or run away. And I promise that if Edwards and his men come for us, they're going to find out what it costs to threaten a child. That enough? Lily studied him with those solemn gray eyes that had seen too much. Finally, she nodded. That's enough. Over the next 2 weeks, they fell into a new routine. Days were spent maintaining the fiction of normalcy. Ethan doing repairs, Marion keeping house, Lily helping where she could. Nights belonged to the documents, to copying and planning and preparing for the moment when they'd have enough leverage to act. Ethan rode into Silver Creek twice, carefully casual, buying supplies and listening to gossip in the saloon. The town was small enough that everyone knew everyone's business, which meant information flowed freely if you knew how to listen. He learned that Judge Edwards held court 3 days a week and spent the rest of his time managing his various business interests. That he'd come to Montana 15 years ago with money from back east and ambition to match. That he'd married well, the daughter of a railroad magnate, but she'd died in childbirth along with their son, leaving him a widower with more wealth than warmth. He learned that Deputy Warren wasn't technically a lawman at all, just a man Edwards had pinned a badge on to give his enforcement a veneer of legality. That the actual sheriff of Silver Creek had retired under mysterious circumstances 5 years ago and never been replaced. That the town council consisted entirely of men who owed Edwards money or favors, or both. And he learned something else, something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. A rider had come through town asking questions about a drifter named Cole. Description matched Ethan perfectly. The rider had left heading south, toward Wyoming, like he was tracking someone. Ethan didn't recognize the description the bartender gave. Medium height, dark hair, scar on his left cheek. But he recognized the pattern. Someone was looking for him. Someone who knew his name and his face and was willing to travel significant distance to find him. He thought about the men he'd crossed over the years, the outlaws he'd brought in as a lawman, the debts he'd left unpaid when he started drifting, the few times he'd drawn his gun in anger or desperation and left bodies behind. Most of those ghosts were old enough that they should have stopped haunting him by now. But ghosts had a way of sticking around, especially in the territories where law was thin and memory long. When he returned to the farm that evening, Marion took one look at his face and set down her sewing. What happened? He told her about the rider. She listened without interrupting, her expression growing more worried with each detail. You think someone's coming for you? Here? Don't know, maybe. Or maybe it's nothing, just someone I knew before, looking to reconnect. Even as he said it, he didn't believe it. Nobody traveled that far for a friendly reunion. Should you leave, before they find you here? The question hurt more than it should have. Ethan realized with something like surprise that the idea of leaving, of walking away from this farm and these people, felt wrong in a way it hadn't felt wrong to leave anywhere else in 6 years. No, he said firmly. I told you I'd see this through. I meant it. Even if staying puts you in danger from more than just Edwards? Even then. Marion stood, crossed to where he sat at the kitchen table, and did something that shocked him. She put her hand on his shoulder, squeezed gently. Thank you for staying, for everything. Her hand was warm through his shirt, her touch careful, like she wasn't quite sure she was allowed. Ethan covered her hand with his own, just for a moment, and something passed between them, recognition, maybe, of two people who'd both lost everything and were trying to figure out how to build something from the ruins. Then Lily called from upstairs, asking for help with something, and the moment broke. Marion pulled away, hurried up the ladder, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts and the weight of choices he'd made. That night, he dreamed of Sarah and Emma for the first time in months. They were at the well in Silver Creek, and he was trying to reach them, but the well kept getting deeper, the rope in his hands stretching impossibly long. Sarah looked up at him with Marion's face, and Emma had Lily's gray eyes, and when he finally pulled them up, they turned to water in his hands and poured away through his fingers. He woke gasping, covered in sweat despite the cool night air. Through the barn boards, he could see the farmhouse, lamplight still burning in the upper window where Marion often sat up late, unable to sleep. 2 weeks became 3. The documents were nearly finished. They had 3 complete copies now, each one meticulously checked against the originals. Ethan had drafted letters to accompany them, laying out the case against Edwards in language he remembered from his lawman days, official and precise. They were close. Maybe another week and they'd be ready to mail everything simultaneously to Helena, to Denver, to federal authorities in Washington. Once the information was scattered that wide, Edwards wouldn't be able to suppress it all. But close also meant dangerous. The closer they got to being ready, the more vulnerable they became. If Edwards discovered what they were doing before they could act, 18 months of Marion's suffering and Thomas's death would all be for nothing. On the 23rd night, everything changed. Ethan was in the barn checking on his horse when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong, metal on metal, coming from the direction of the house. He froze, hand on his gun, every sense suddenly alert. There, again. Someone was trying to pry open the back window, the one in the kitchen that stuck and squealed when you forced it. He moved fast and quiet, crossing the yard in a crouch, coming around the side of the house. 2 figures were silhouetted against the star-filled sky, one boosting the other toward the window. Ethan drew his gun, cocked the hammer. The sound was loud in the quiet night. "Step away from the house." Both men froze. The one at the window dropped to the ground, and Ethan recognized them, the 2 ranch hands who'd ridden with Deputy Warren. "We're just," one started, "breaking into a private residence, I know." Ethan kept the gun steady. "Question is why? Edwards send you?" Inside the house, he heard movement, heard Marion's sharp intake of breath. She'd be getting Lily, getting the rifle Thomas had kept behind the door. Judge wants his property secured, which the gap-toothed one said. Heard there might be trespassers. We're here to check it out. At midnight. By breaking in through a window. Look, we don't want trouble. Then you came to the wrong place. Ethan's voice went cold. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to get on your horses and ride back to town. You're going to tell Edwards that this property is occupied and defended, and the next person who sets foot on it uninvited is going to get shot. Understood? They glanced at each other, weighing odds. Two of them, one of Ethan. But Ethan's gun was already drawn and aimed, and they were exposed in the moonlight while he had darkness and the house at his back. This ain't over, the gap-toothed man said. No, it's not, but it's over for tonight. Now move. They backed away slowly, hands raised, then turned and ran for their horses tied in the scrub beyond the yard. Ethan watched until they were gone, until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. When he turned back to the house, Marion was on the porch with the rifle, Lily pressed against her side. They'll be back, she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook on the gun. And they won't come alone next time. I know. Ethan climbed the porch steps, took the rifle gently from her hands. We're out of time, Marion. We need to get those documents out tomorrow. Can't wait any longer. Tomorrow? But we haven't... It doesn't matter if we haven't finished everything perfect. What we have is enough. 3 copies, 3 destinations, all mailed at once. We do it tomorrow, or we risk Edwards making a move we can't counter. Marion looked at Lily, at her daughter's frightened face, and made her decision. All right, tomorrow. I'll ride to Helena myself if I have to. No, too dangerous. Edwards might have people watching the roads. Ethan thought fast. There's a mail coach that runs through Copper Ridge, about 15 miles east, stops there every Wednesday before heading to Helena. If we can get the packages there by noon, I know a shortcut through the canyon. Could cut the distance in half. Marion's eyes brightened with something that might have been hope. We could do it. All of us together. All of us means Lily, too. That's a hard ride. I can do it, Lily said quietly. I want to help finish what Papa started. Ethan looked at this child who'd already endured so much, who was offering to endure more because she understood what was at stake. He thought about Emma, about how he'd kept her safe by keeping her sheltered, and how in the end it hadn't mattered because death found her anyway. Maybe safety wasn't about hiding from danger. Maybe it was about facing it with people you trusted at your side. All right, he said, we ride tomorrow, all 3 of us. And we end this. They rose before dawn, moving through the farmhouse in tense silence. Marion packed what little food they had, hardtack, dried beef, a canteen of water. Ethan saddled all 3 horses, checking cinches twice, making sure everything was secure for hard riding. Lily dressed in her sturdiest clothes, a pair of Thomas's old work pants cut down to fit her small frame, boots that were too big stuffed with rags. The documents were wrapped in oilcloth and divided between 2 saddlebags, insurance against losing everything if one horse went down. Ethan had written the addresses clearly on each package, had sealed them with wax he'd bought in town weeks ago for this exact purpose. 3 copies, 3 destinations: Helena, Denver, Washington. One of them had to get through. We stick together, Ethan said as Marion lifted Lily onto her horse. No matter what happens, we don't separate. If we run into trouble, we ride through it, not around it. Speed's our friend today. What kind of trouble are you expecting? Marion asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. The kind that's been brewing since your husband died. Edwards can't afford to let us leave with those documents. If he knows we're making a move, he knows. Lily's voice was small but certain. I saw someone watching the house yesterday, from the rocks. He had a spyglass. Ethan and Marion exchanged glances. Why didn't you say something? Marion asked. I wasn't sure. Thought maybe I imagined it. Lily touched the horse's mane, running her fingers through the coarse hair. But I didn't. There was someone there. So they were already being watched. The attempted break-in last night hadn't been random. It had been a test, a probe to see how defended the farm was, how ready they were to fight. And now Edwards knew they had at least 1 gun, at least 1 person willing to use it. The question was what he'd do with that information. Then we move fast, Ethan said. Marion, you know this shortcut through the canyon? Like the back of my hand. Thomas and I used to ride it when we were courting, cut straight through the ridge, comes out near Copper Ridge from the north. Nobody uses it much anymore. The trail's rough, and there's a narrow passage about halfway through that spooks horses. But it'll save us 3 hours at least. 3 hours might be the difference between making it and not. Ethan swung into his saddle, settled his weight. The horse shifted beneath him, sensing his tension. Lead the way. They rode out as the sky was turning gray, that pre-dawn light that made everything look unreal, like the world hadn't quite decided to be solid yet. The air was cool against Ethan's face, carrying the smell of sage and dust and the faint metallic tang that meant rain later, though the sky was clear now. Behind them, the farmhouse stood silent and dark, looking more abandoned than occupied. Ethan wondered if they'd ever see it again, if this desperate ride would end with them starting over somewhere new, or if it would end the way too many things in this territory ended, with blood in the dirt and buzzards circling overhead. He pushed the thought away and focused on the trail ahead. The canyon entrance was a narrow cut between two massive rock formations that looked like they'd been split by some ancient violence and never properly healed. Marion led them in without hesitation, her horse picking its way over loose stones and around scrub brush that grabbed its stirrups. Inside, the canyon walls rose steep on both sides, blocking out most of the growing light. The trail wound deeper, following what had probably been a creek bed thousands of years ago, now dry except for patches of damp sand where water still seeped up from below. Lily rode between them, small and straight-backed, her hands tight on the reins. She hadn't complained once, hadn't asked to rest or turn back. Ethan watched her from behind and felt something shift in his chest, some piece of the armor he'd built around himself after Sarah and Emma died starting to crack. This child wasn't his daughter. This woman riding ahead wasn't his wife. This fight wasn't his battle. Except it was. The moment he'd run down that hill to help Lily, he'd made it his. The moment he'd looked into Marion's exhausted eyes and promised to see this through, he'd claimed it. And somewhere along the way, in the long nights copying documents and the quiet conversations over coffee and the small moments of shared purpose, this broken family had become something he was willing to die for. The realization should have scared him. Instead, it felt like the first honest thing he'd felt in 6 years. They'd been riding for maybe an hour when Marion raised her hand, signaling them to stop. The narrow passage is just ahead. We need to go single file, and we need to be quiet. Sound echoes in there, and the horses hate it. If one of them panics, we could have a real problem. Ethan moved up beside her, studying the gap in the rocks ahead. It was maybe 6 feet wide at the opening, narrowing to what looked like 3 feet or less at its tightest point. The walls were smooth stone, worn by wind and time, and they rose 30 feet straight up on both sides. How long is it? Quarter mile, maybe less. Comes out into a wider section where we can rest the horses. Marion glanced at Lily. You remember this part, baby? From when we came through with your papa? Lily nodded. I remember. Papa said to trust the horse and keep my eyes forward. That's right, just like he taught you. Marion squeezed her daughter's hand. Ethan, you bring up the rear. If anything happens, if someone's following us, I'll handle it. You just get yourself and Lily through. They entered the passage one by one, Marion first, then Lily, then Ethan. The walls closed in immediately, the temperature dropping as shadow swallowed them. The horses' hooves rang loud on stone, echoing and re-echoing until it sounded like a dozen riders instead of 3. Ethan's horse tossed its head, nervous. He stroked its neck, murmuring low. Easy, easy now, just to walk through some rocks. Nothing to worry about. Except there was plenty to worry about. The passage was a perfect place for an ambush, no way to turn around, no way to escape except forward or back, and if someone blocked either end, they'd be trapped like rats in a barrel. Every few yards, Ethan glanced behind them, watching for movement, for any sign they'd been followed. The passage seemed to go on forever. At its narrowest point, Ethan's boot scraped the wall and his horse had to turn sideways to squeeze through. For a few heart-stopping seconds, he thought they might actually get stuck, might have to abandon the animals and go on foot. Then they were through, the walls widening again, and he could breathe. Ahead, Lily let out a small sound of relief. Marion reached back and touched her shoulder, reassuring. They emerged into the wider section Marion had described, a natural bowl in the canyon where centuries of wind had carved the rocks into strange shapes. There was even a little vegetation here, tough grass, and a few stunted trees clinging to cracks in the stone. 5 minutes, Marion said, dismounting. Let the horses breathe, drink some water ourselves, then we push hard for Copper Ridge. Ethan helped Lily down, watched her stretch her legs. She was holding up better than he'd expected, but he could see the strain around her eyes, the way she moved stiff from hours in the saddle. You doing all right? Yes, sir. How much farther? Maybe 2 hours if we make good time. He offered her the canteen. Your mama says you're brave. She's right. Lily drank, wiped her mouth. I'm scared, though. Is that okay? Being scared and being brave aren't opposites. Brave is doing what needs doing, even when you're scared. He crouched down to her level. Your papa was scared too, I bet. But he did the right thing anyway. That's what matters. Will they kill us? The judge's men? The question was too direct, too clear-eyed for comfort. Ethan wanted to lie, wanted to tell her everything would be fine, but Lily deserved better than comfortable lies. They'll try, but I've been in bad situations before and come out the other side. Your mama's tough as nails, and you're tougher than you know, so yeah, they might try. But trying and succeeding are different things. Lily considered this, then nodded. Papa used to say that too. That trying was just the start, not the finish. Smart man, your papa. I wish he was here. Me too, honey. Me too. They remounted and pushed on. The canyon wound through the ridge for another mile, sometimes wide enough for 2 horses abreast, sometimes narrowing again to single file. The sun was well up now, pouring light into the canyon from above, turning the red stone the color of dried blood. Ethan kept checking behind them. Still no sign of pursuit, but that didn't mean they were safe. Edwards had resources, men, horses, knowledge of the territory. He could have sent riders around the long way, could be waiting for them at the canyon's exit or on the road to Copper Ridge. They had to assume the worst and hope for the best. The canyon finally opened onto high prairie, grassland stretching to the horizon with mountains blue in the distance. Marion reined in, getting her bearings. Copper Ridge is northeast. We follow that ridgeline for about 5 miles, then drop down into the valley where the town sits. She pointed. If we ride hard, we can make it by 11. That gives us an hour to find the mail coach station and get the packages sent before it leaves. Then let's ride. They kicked their horses into a gallop, eating up the miles. The prairie grass whispered around them, and overhead hawks circled in the clear sky, riding thermals up from the warming earth. It was beautiful country, the kind of landscape that made you understand why people fought and died for land out here. They'd covered maybe 3 of the 5 miles when Ethan saw the riders, 4 of them, coming fast from the south, angling to intercept. Even at this distance, he could make out Deputy Warren's distinctive hat, could see the glint of metal that meant they were armed and ready. Marion, he shouted, we've got company. She looked back, saw the riders, and her face went pale. How did they... Doesn't matter. Can we outrun them to town? She judged the distance, shook her head. They're too close. They'll cut us off before we make it. Then we go through them. Through. You and Lily stay low, stay fast. Don't stop for anything. I'll give you cover. Ethan, there's 4 of them. And I've got surprise and motivation. Move! They urged their horses faster, but the gap was closing. Warren and his men were riding fresh mounts, well-fed and strong, while Ethan's group had been traveling for hours. The math wasn't good. 200 yards. 100. Ethan could see Warren's face now, see the grim satisfaction there. This was what he'd been waiting for, the chance to catch them away from the farm, away from any help, with nowhere to run. 50 yards. Ethan pulled his rifle from its scabbard, a Winchester he'd carried since Kansas. He was a decent shot at distance, better up close. But shooting from horseback at moving targets was hard, even for an expert, and he hadn't practiced in years. Still, had to try. When they get close, you break right, he shouted to Marion. Take Lily and run. Don't look back. We're not leaving you. You are. Those documents are more important than I am. Get them to the mail coach. Promise me. Marion's eyes were wild, but she nodded. I promise. 20 yards. Warren's men spread out, forming a line to block them. Warren himself raised a rifle, aimed not at Ethan, but at Marion. Pull up, Warren shouted. Pull up now, or I put her down. Ethan made his choice in a heartbeat. He yanked his horse hard left. putting himself between Warren's rifle and Marion, and fired the Winchester one-handed. The shot went wide, but it made Warren's horse shy, spoiling his aim. "Go!" Ethan roared. "Now!" Marion grabbed Lily's reins and wheeled right, kicking her horse into a dead run. One of Warren's men tried to follow, but Ethan fired again, closer this time, and the man ducked and pulled up. Warren was shouting orders, trying to organize his men, but Ethan kept firing, not trying to hit anyone necessarily, just making enough noise and danger that they couldn't coordinate. The gap-toothed man from the farm reached for his own gun, but Ethan's next shot clipped his shoulder, and he fell backward out of the saddle with a scream. That changed the math. 3 against 1 now, and Marion and Lily were getting clear, opening distance between themselves and the ambush. "You just made a big mistake, Cole." Warren leveled his rifle. Ethan threw himself sideways as Warren fired. The bullet passed so close he felt the air move, heard it whine past his head. His horse stumbled, terrified, and Ethan fought to keep his seat as the animal bucked and spun. The other 2 men were closing in from opposite sides. Ethan recognized the play. Box him in, make him an easy target. He looked ahead and saw a line of rocks, maybe 20 yards off. Cover. If he could reach it, he kicked his horse hard, racing for the rocks. Behind him, guns barked. Something tugged at his coat, another bullet passing through fabric but missing flesh. His horse grunted but kept running, foam flying from its mouth. The rocks were closer, 10 yards, 5. Ethan hit them at full gallop and threw himself off, rolling behind a boulder as his horse kept running. Bullets spanged off stone, showering him with chips. He came up with the Winchester, found a target, fired. One of the men's horses screamed and went down, throwing its rider hard. 2 left. Warren and 1 other. "Give it up, Cole!" Warren had dismounted, was using his own horse for cover. "There's nowhere to run. You send those documents to Helena and we'll hunt you down. All of you. That little girl, we'll make sure she dies just like her father." Cold rage flooded Ethan's veins. The kind of rage that made your hands steady instead of shake, that turned fear into something sharp and useful. "You shouldn't have said that," he called back. He rolled left, came up in a different position, and fired 3 times fast. The first shot hit Warren's horse, regrettable but necessary. The animal screamed and collapsed, pinning Warren's leg underneath. The second shot took the other man in the chest. He fell without a sound. The third shot was insurance, kicking up dirt near Warren's head. "Your men are down," Ethan said, walking forward with the rifle aimed steady. "Your horse is dying, and in about 2 minutes I'm going to put a bullet through your skull unless you give me one good reason not to." Warren was struggling to free his leg, his face red with effort and pain. "You can't. I'm a deputy." "You're a murderer wearing a badge that means nothing. I know it. You know it. Only question is whether you die here or whether you live long enough to see Judge Edwards in federal prison." Ethan stopped 10 feet away. "Your choice. You're bluffing. You were a lawman. You won't shoot an unarmed man." "I was a lawman, past tense. Now I'm something else. Something your judge created when he decided to kill a good man and terrorize his family. So yeah, Frank, I absolutely will shoot you, unless you tell me what I want to know." Warren stared at him, measuring. Whatever he saw in Ethan's eyes made him swallow hard. "What do you want to know? How many men does Edwards have? How many like you willing to kill on his orders?" "Maybe a dozen. Most of them ranch hands, a few hired guns from out of territory. Where's he keep his own records? The original documents that prove what he's done?" "His office, above the courthouse, safe behind the desk. I don't know the combination." "The man who pushed Thomas Harper into the well. Was it Edwards himself?" Warren's silence was answer enough. "Say it," Ethan demanded. "Say it out loud." Yeah, it was Edwards. I was there. I watched. He said Harper was a problem that needed solving, and he solved it. Then he paid me to make sure the investigation went nowhere." "And you did. For money. For survival. You cross Edwards in this territory, you end up dead or disappeared. I got a family. Thomas Harper had a family too. You think about them while you were covering up his murder? Think about that little girl who watched her father die." Warren looked away. Ethan wanted to pull the trigger, wanted it so bad his finger ached on the rifle. But killing Warren here now would make him no different than the men he was fighting against. And he'd promised Lily they'd do this right, that her father's truth would be heard. "Here's what's going to happen," Ethan said. "You're going to write down everything you just told me, every detail about Edwards, about Harper's murder, about the land theft. You're going to sign it and date it. And then you're going to ride back to Silver Creek and wait. When the federal marshals come, and they will come, you're going to tell them everything again. In exchange, maybe you don't hang alongside Edwards. And if I don't? Then I come back and finish what I started here. Your choice, Frank. Live as a witness or die as an accomplice." Warren's horse finally stopped thrashing, its breathing slowing. The deputy managed to pull his leg free, wincing. "You really think those documents will make a difference? Edwards has friends in Helena, friends in Washington, the kind of friends who make evidence disappear." "Maybe, but we're not just sending evidence to Helena. We're sending it everywhere. And even Edwards' friends can't suppress everything once the newspapers get hold of it." Ethan stepped back, lowering the rifle slightly. "You've got one chance to be on the right side of this, Frank. Take it or don't. But choose now." Warren looked at his dead companion, at the man who'd been shot in the shoulder and was moaning in the grass, at the horse dying beneath him. He looked at Ethan and saw something there that made his shoulders slump in defeat. "All right, I'll write it down. I'll testify. Just don't kill me. Then start walking back to town. I see you anywhere near Marion and Lily again, our deal's off." Warren limped away, heading south on foot, leaving his wounded companion and his dead horse behind. Ethan watched until he disappeared over a rise, then turned to the wounded man. "Can you ride?" The man nodded, clutching his shoulder. "Then get on a horse and get out of here. Tell Edwards his reign is over. Tell him the truth is coming and there's nothing he can do to stop it." The man didn't need to be told twice. He staggered to one of the loose horses, hauled himself into the saddle with his good arm, and rode off. Ethan stood alone on the prairie, surrounded by the aftermath of violence, and let himself shake. His hands trembled, his legs felt weak, and his heart hammered against his ribs like it wanted out. He'd killed a man today, shot him off his horse, and watched him fall. The man's face was already getting fuzzy in his memory, which was maybe a mercy, but the weight of it sat on Ethan's chest like a stone. He'd killed before, in his lawman days, always in self-defense, always in the line of duty, but this felt different. This felt personal. He thought about Warren's words, that he was no longer the lawman he'd been. Maybe that was true. Maybe the man who'd carried a badge in Kansas was gone, replaced by something harder and more willing to cross lines. Or maybe he'd always had this in him, and it had just taken the right circumstances to bring it out. Either way, there was no going back now. He caught one of the loose horses. His own had disappeared over the horizon, and climbed into an unfamiliar saddle. The horse was skittish, but responded to firm handling. Ethan pointed it northeast toward Copper Ridge and kicked it into a gallop. Marion and Lily would be at the town by now, would be finding the mail coach station, sending the documents on their way to Helena and Denver and Washington, doing what Thomas Harper had died trying to do. Ethan just had to get there before Edwards sent more men, had to make sure those packages actually got on the coach. Had to... Gunfire erupted from the direction of Copper Ridge. Ethan's blood turned to ice. He kicked the horse harder, demanding more speed, his mind racing through terrible possibilities. Edwards had more men there. Edwards had gotten there first. Edwards had Marion and Lily, and... He crested a small rise and saw the town spread out below. Copper Ridge was barely a town at all, just a dozen buildings clustered around a crossroads, the mail coach station identifiable by the corrals out back. And in front of the station, 3 men on horseback had Marion and Lily cornered against a water trough. Ethan didn't think, didn't plan. He just rode straight down the hill, rifle in one hand, screaming a challenge that came from somewhere primal and wordless. The men looked up, startled. One of them raised a gun, but Ethan fired first, firing as he rode, bullets going wild but close enough to make them scatter. His horse hit level ground at full speed and he charged straight into the group, scattering them like chickens. Marion grabbed Lily and pulled her down behind the water trough as Ethan wheeled his horse around, trying to keep himself between them and the gunmen. "Get inside," he shouted. "Get those packages sent." "They've got the station surrounded," Marion called back. "We can't." "Yes, you can. I'll hold them. Go!" One of the men had recovered from the shock of Ethan's charge and was aiming carefully. Ethan saw it happening, saw the gun coming up, knew he was about to take a bullet, and there was nothing he could do about it. Then the station door flew open and an old man with a shotgun stepped out. "Nobody shoots nobody in front of my station," he roared, and fired one barrel into the air. "You boys want to kill each other. You take it out of town. This here's a mail station, federal property, and I'll blow a hole in anyone who thinks different." The gunman hesitated, looking at his companions. They were outnumbered now, 3 of them against Ethan, the old man, and whoever else might come out of the buildings if the shooting continued. "Edwards is going to hear about this," one of them shouted. "You tell Edwards I don't give a damn," the old man yelled back. "Now get!" They rode off, heading south toward Silver Creek, throwing threats and curses back over their shoulders. Ethan dismounted on shaking legs. The old man lowered his shotgun, squinting at him. "You the fellow these ladies are waiting for?" "Yes, sir." "Then you better get in here. Mail coach leaves in 10 minutes and they've got packages that need sending." He looked at Marion and Lily, still crouched behind the water trough. "You folks all right?" "We're fine," Marion said, standing and brushing dust from her dress. Her face was pale but composed. "Thank you." Inside the station, they completed the transaction in a blur of motion. 3 packages, 3 destinations, paid for with money Marion had been saving for 18 months. The station master, the same old man with the shotgun, took them without question and loaded them into the mail coach's strong box. "These'll be in Helena by tomorrow evening," he said. "Denver in 3 days, Washington in about 10. Whatever's in here, it must be important." "It's everything," Lily said quietly. The old man looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his weathered face softened. "Then it'll get there, little miss. I give you my word." The coach driver climbed up to his seat, gathered the reins. 4 fresh horses stamped and snorted in their traces, ready to run. Ethan, Marion, and Lily stood outside and watched the coach pull away, heading east toward the territorial capital, carrying Thomas Harper's truth and the evidence that would bring down Judge Edwards's empire. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Lily started crying, not loud, just quiet tears running down her face. Marion knelt beside her. "Baby, what's wrong? We did it. We got the packages sent." "I know," Lily said through her tears. I wish Papa could see it. Wish he knew we finished what he started." "He knows," Ethan said, his own throat tight. "Wherever he is, honey, he knows, and he's proud of you." Marion pulled Lily close, holding her while she cried. Ethan turned away to give them privacy and found the station master watching him. "Those men who were here," the old man said quietly. "They'll go back and tell whoever sent them. You folks planning to stay in Copper Ridge?" "Can't. We need to get back to Silver Creek." "That seems unwise." "Maybe. But that's where our home is. That's where we make our stand." Ethan met the old man's eyes. "How long before word of those packages gets around?" "News travels fast. I'd say by nightfall, half the territory knows something big went out on today's mail. By tomorrow, everyone knows, including whoever you're fighting against." "Good. Let him know. Let him sweat." The old man smiled, grim. "You've got steel in you, mister. You're going to need it." They rode back the way they came. Slower now, exhausted but alive. The confrontation with Warren's men had bought them time. Edwards wouldn't know yet whether the documents had been sent or if they'd been stopped. He'd be scrambling, trying to get information, trying to decide his next move. But he'd know soon enough, and then the real battle would begin. They were 5 miles from the farm when Ethan's borrowed horse threw a shoe. He dismounted, examined the hoof, cursed quietly. "Can you fix it?" Marion asked. "Not without tools. We'll have to go slow, maybe walk him the rest of the way," which meant they wouldn't reach the farm until after dark. Wouldn't have daylight to see if Edwards had sent men there, wouldn't be able to assess what they were riding into. Ethan looked at the sun, measuring time. "Maybe we should hole up somewhere. Wait until morning." "Where?" "We're in open country. No shelter for miles except—" Marion stopped, her eyes widening. "The cave. The one we stocked with supplies. It's only about a mile north of here. Can we reach it before full dark?" "If we hurry." They hurried. The cave was exactly where Marion had said. a natural hollow in a rock formation that offered concealment and protection. They led the horses inside, far enough back that they wouldn't be visible from outside, and Ethan built a small fire with wood they'd stored there weeks ago. Lily fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted beyond her limits. Marion covered her with a blanket, touched her forehead gently. "She's stronger than I ever was at her age," she said softly. "I don't know how she does it." She learned from her parents, both of them. Ethan poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling up. "You did good today, Marion. Thomas would be proud." "We're not done yet. Edward still has power, still has men. Those documents need to reach the right people, need to be acted on. That could take weeks, months. Then we hold out until they do. Together." Marion looked at him across the firelight, her face half in shadow. "Why are you really doing this, Ethan? The truth this time. Not the easy answer." He was quiet for a long time, watching flames consume wood, turning solid matter into heat and light and ash. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. 6 years ago, my wife and daughter died while I was off being a hero, chasing outlaws, making arrests, collecting bounties. I told myself I was making the world safer, that my work mattered. And maybe it did. But it didn't matter to them when the fever came. They died without me, scared and alone, and I've been running from that ever since. Running from the guilt, from the grief, from the man I was who thought his duty mattered more than his family. He looked up, met her eyes. Then I saw your daughter fall in the street, and a whole town turn their backs. And something in me just broke. Or maybe it was already broken, and that's what fixed it. I don't know. But I knew I couldn't walk away, not again. Not from people who needed help when I had the ability to give it. He swallowed hard. So that's the truth. I'm not here because I'm noble or heroic. I'm here because I'm trying to be the man I should have been 6 years ago. Trying to save a family because I couldn't save my own. Marion's eyes shone with tears. She reached across the fire, found his hand, held it tight. "You can't save us, Ethan. We're not yours to save. But you can stand with us. And that's what you've been doing. That's what matters." They sat like that for a while, hands joined across the flames, two broken people finding something like hope in shared purpose. Outside the cave, night settled over the Montana wilderness. Somewhere to the south, Judge Edwards was learning that his secrets were no longer secret, that the evidence of his crimes was spreading beyond his reach, and somewhere in the darkness, the future was rushing toward them like a storm. They reached the farm just after sunrise, approaching cautiously from the north ridge, where they could see the whole property spread out below. Ethan studied the house through the morning light, looking for signs of intrusion, but everything appeared untouched. The barn doors were still closed the way he'd left them. The chickens scratched in their yard. Nothing moved except the wind pushing dust across the empty fields. "Looks clear," Marion said, but her voice held uncertainty. "Looks can lie." Ethan handed her the reins of his lame horse. "Stay here with Lily. Let me check it out first. If there's men inside, then you'll hear shooting and you'll ride for Copper Ridge. Don't argue, Marion. If this goes bad, those documents are already sent, but you and Lily still need to survive to testify." She wanted to protest. He could see it in her face, but she nodded instead. "Be careful." He made his way down on foot, using the barn for cover, every sense alert for the sound or smell of men lying in wait. The barn was empty except for old straw and the faint scent of horses long gone. The house felt abandoned when he stepped onto the porch, the boards creaking under his weight in a way that seemed too loud. Inside, everything was exactly as they'd left it. The kitchen table still had their coffee cups from 2 mornings ago. Lily's small jacket hung on a peg by the door. The rifle was still propped behind the stove where Marion kept it. Ethan checked every room, every closet, even the root cellar, but found nothing. No men, no signs of search, no evidence that Edwards had sent anyone here at all, which didn't make sense, unless... He stepped back outside and waved to Marion. She came down the ridge slowly, Lily pressed close to her side, both of them scanning the horizon for threats that didn't appear. "I don't understand," Marion said as they entered the house. "Why wouldn't Edwards send men here? He has to know we got those packages sent by now. Warren would have told him what happened." Maybe that's exactly why he didn't. Ethan moved to the window, looking out toward the road that led to Silver Creek. Think about it. Those documents are already on their way to 3 different destinations. Edwards can't stop them from arriving. His only play now is damage control. Discredit us before anyone takes the evidence seriously. How would he do that? Same way men like him always do. Make us look unstable, crazy. Say we're a grieving widow with delusions and a drifter with a criminal past making wild accusations against a respected judge. Ethan turned to face her. If he kills us now, we become martyrs and the evidence looks more credible. But if he lets us live, lets us make our accusations, then publicly proves we're unreliable. That damages the case more than our deaths would. Lily was sitting at the table, her gray eyes moving between them as they talked. So he's going to lie about us? Like he lied about Papa? Probably, and he'll be convincing about it too. Men like Edwards are good at making lies sound like truth. But we have proof. Papa's papers, the deeds, everything. We have copies, honey. Edwards has had 18 months to destroy or alter the originals. And he's got friends in the territorial government who can claim our copies are forgeries. Ethan knelt in front of Lily, meeting her eyes. This isn't over just because we sent those packages. In some ways, it's just beginning. Marion sank into a chair, the weight of everything settling on her shoulders. So what do we do? Just wait and see how he tries to destroy us? No. We prepare. We document everything we can while we still can. We get statements from people who might be willing to testify, families who lost their land, anyone who saw suspicious activity around your husband's death. We build a case that's so solid, even Edwards' friends can't ignore it. And if that doesn't work? Ethan stood, moved to the window again. In the distance, he could see dust rising from the road. Riders coming from town. Several of them. Then we fight, he said quietly. One way or another, we fight. The riders were closer now. 5 of them, moving at an easy pace that suggested confidence rather than urgency. Ethan recognized Deputy Warren in the lead despite the distance, his arm in a rough sling where the bullet had grazed him yesterday. Marion, take Lily upstairs, keep away from the windows. What are you going to do? Talk to them, see what Edwards wants. Ethan, go, please. She gathered Lily and disappeared up the ladder to the loft. Ethan heard their footsteps moving away from the edge, finding the darkest corner where they'd be hardest to see. He checked his gun, made sure it moved smooth in the holster, and stepped out onto the porch. Warren and his men rode into the yard and stopped 20 feet from the house. The deputy looked haggard, his face gray with pain and lack of sleep. The other men were harder to read, ranch hands and hired guns, men who did what they were paid to do and didn't ask questions. Morning, Cole, Warren said, his voice was hoarse. Frank, didn't expect to see you back so soon. Figured you'd be writing that confession like we discussed. Yeah, about that. Warren shifted in his saddle, wincing. Turns out I had some time to think on my walk back to town. Think about what you said about choosing sides, and I realized something. What's that? I already chose, long time ago. And switching sides now, after all I've done, that won't bring Thomas Harper back. Won't undo the things I helped Edwards do. All it'll do is get me hanged instead of him. Ethan's hand drifted toward his gun. So, you're here to finish what you started yesterday? I'm here to deliver a message from Judge Edwards. He wants to talk. I'm listening. Not here. In town. At the courthouse. He's calling a public meeting for tomorrow noon, wants to address the accusations he's heard are being made against him, give his side of the story before things get out of hand. Warren's smile was bitter. He's going to offer you a deal, Cole. You and Mrs. Harper both. A way out of this that doesn't end with everyone dead. What kind of deal? That's between you and him. But if you're smart, you'll hear him out. Because the alternative, Warren gestured to the men with him. Judge has got 20 armed men in Silver Creek right now. More coming from his other properties. You think you can fight that many? You think you can protect that woman and her little girl against those odds? Ethan thought about the rifle behind the door, about his Colt with maybe 30 rounds of ammunition total, about the cave in the rocks that might hide them for a day or two, but no longer. Thought about Lily's gray eyes watching him, trusting him to keep them safe. What guarantees do we have? That Edwards won't just kill us the moment we step into town? Public meeting, witnesses. Half the territory is going to be there once word spreads about tomorrow. Edwards is many things, but he's not stupid enough to commit murder in front of 100 people. He wants this handled clean and legal. Warren paused. Or as legal as things get out here. And if we don't come, then he comes here, with all 20 men, burns this place to the ground and salts the earth so nothing grows here again. You and Mrs. Harper can run if you want, but you'll be running the rest of your lives. And that little girl, she deserves better than growing up fugitive. The words hit hard because they were true. Even if they survived an assault on the farm, even if they managed to escape, what kind of life would that be for Lily? Always looking over her shoulder, always afraid, never able to settle anywhere because Edward's reach extended farther than this valley. I need to talk to Marion. You got until sundown to decide. Meetings at noon tomorrow. You don't show, Edwards assumes you're choosing the hard way. Warren turned his horse. One more thing, Cole. That rider who was looking for you, the one with the scar on his cheek? Ethan's blood went cold. What about him? He's in Silver Creek now, staying at the boarding house. Been asking a lot of questions about where you might be, what you've been doing, who you've been spending time with. Seems real interested in finding you. Warren's smile had teeth in it. Thought you should know, in case that factors into your decision. They rode off, leaving Ethan alone with a choice that felt like no choice at all. He waited until they disappeared over the ridge before calling up to the loft. They're gone. You can come down. Marion descended first, her face pale but composed. Lily followed, moving to stand beside her mother, one hand gripping Marion's skirt. I heard, Marion said. The whole thing. What do we do? I don't know yet. Ethan paced the small kitchen, thinking through angles and options. Edwards is smart. He knows we sent those documents, knows they'll reach Helena and Denver and Washington. But he also knows the territorial government moves slow. Could be weeks or even months before anyone acts on what we sent. He's buying himself time to control the narrative. By making a public spectacle? Offering us a deal in front of witnesses? Exactly. He'll seem reasonable, generous even. Offer us money to leave town, maybe a public apology for our misunderstanding about Thomas's death. Make himself look like the bigger man while making us look like troublemakers who won't let go of conspiracy theories. Marion's hands clenched into fists. And if we refuse his deal, then we look unreasonable, like we're not interested in justice, just in causing problems for a respected judge. When those documents finally reach the right people, Edwards will have already poisoned opinion against us. Our evidence will be dismissed as the ravings of bitter, unstable people. But the evidence is real. The deeds, the property transfers, the pattern. I know, but Edwards has had 18 months to prepare his defense. He'll have explanations for everything, documents of his own, witnesses who'll swear he's always acted above board. It'll be our word against his, and he's a territorial judge while we're... Ethan stopped. Nobody's, Marion finished quietly. A widow and a drifter, nobody knows. Nobody with reason to believe us. Lily looked up at her mother. But I saw him kill Papa. That's not nobody's word, that's my word. You were 6 years old, baby, and you're his daughter. People will say you're confused or being manipulated by your mother or... Marion's voice broke. They'll find ways to not believe you. They always do. The defeat in her voice cut Ethan deeper than any bullet could have. He crossed to where they stood and took Marion's hands, waiting until she looked at him. Thomas didn't give up. You didn't give up, and I'll be damned if I give up now. He squeezed her hands gently. We go to that meeting tomorrow. We hear what Edwards has to say. But we go prepared, and we go smart, and we don't accept any deal that means giving up on justice. What if he won't negotiate? What if it's his deal or nothing? Then we choose nothing, and we deal with the consequences together. Lily's small voice cut through the tension. Who's the man looking for you? The one Deputy Warren mentioned? Ethan had hoped she hadn't caught that part. He looked down at her serious face and knew he couldn't lie. Someone from my past, before I came here. I don't know what he wants, but it's probably not good. Is he going to hurt you? He's going to try, but I've survived worse than him, and I had a lot less worth fighting for back then. He managed to smile. Don't worry about me, honey. Worry about getting through tomorrow. That night they prepared like soldiers before battle. Ethan cleaned his guns and counted his ammunition. 32 rounds for the Colt, maybe 60 for the Winchester if he was lucky. Not enough for a prolonged fight, but enough to make anyone think twice about pushing them. Marion took Thomas's old revolver from its hiding place and practiced drawing it, her hands clumsy at first but growing steadier with repetition. "Thomas tried to teach me," she said, sighting down the barrel at an imaginary target. "I never thought I'd need to actually use it." "You probably won't, but if you do..." Ethan adjusted her grip slightly. "Aim for center mass, squeeze the trigger, don't pull, and keep shooting until the threat stops moving. Don't hesitate. Don't warn them. Just shoot." She nodded, pale but determined. They practiced until full dark, until Lily fell asleep at the table with her head on her arms, exhausted by fear and uncertainty. Ethan carried her up to the loft and laid her gently on the bed. She stirred, reached out sleepily. "Mr. Cole?" "Right here, honey. If something bad happens tomorrow, if the judge hurts Mama or hurts you, I want you to know I'm glad you came. You made things better, even if it doesn't end good." Ethan's throat closed up. He managed to whisper, "Nothing bad's going to happen. I promise." But promises you couldn't keep were worse than no promises at all, and they both knew it. Morning came too fast. They rose in the gray light before dawn and prepared in silence. Marion dressed in her Sunday best, a dark dress that had been Thomas's favorite, her hair pulled back severe and dignified. Lily wore a clean pinafore over her patched dress, looking far too young to be caught up in adult battles over land and greed and murder. Ethan wore the same trail clothes he'd been wearing for weeks, but he'd brushed the dust off and tried to look presentable. A man going to face a territorial judge should look like he took the meeting seriously. They rode into Silver Creek mid-morning, giving themselves time to see the town before the noon meeting. Main Street was crowded with more people than Ethan had seen since arriving, ranchers and farmers and townfolk, all drawn by news of the public meeting. Whatever Edwards had planned, he'd made sure there'd be witnesses. People stared as they rode past. Some faces showed sympathy, others hostility, most just curiosity. Ethan heard whispers following them like wind through dry grass. "That's the Harper widow. Poor thing's never been right since Thomas died. And that's the drifter who's been filling her head with ideas. Shame what's happening to that little girl. Someone should take her somewhere safe." They tied their horses at the public hitching post and walked toward the courthouse. It was the biggest building in Silver Creek, 2 stories of white-painted wood with columns out front meant to suggest justice and order. Today it looked like a gallows. Inside, the main hall was already filling with people. Chairs had been set up facing a raised platform where Judge Edwards would hold court. Deputy Warren stood near the door, watching everyone who entered. When he saw Ethan, he nodded toward 3 empty chairs in the front row. "Judge wants you where everyone can see you," he said quietly. "Said to tell you he appreciates you coming. Like we had a choice. There's always choices, Cole. Question is whether you can live with the consequences." They took their seats. Lily sat between Ethan and Marion, her small hands gripping both of theirs. Around them, the hall continued to fill. Ethan recognized faces from the mercantile, the saloon, the boarding house. These were people who'd watched Lily collapse at the well and done nothing. People who'd turned their backs on the Harpers for 18 months because it was easier than standing up to Edwards. Now they'd come to watch the final act, to see how it ended, to be able to say they were there when judgment came. At precisely noon, Judge Edwards entered from a side door. He was tall and distinguished-looking, maybe 50 years old, with silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He wore a black suit that probably cost more than most people in the room earned in a year. His face was pleasant, even kind. The face of a man you'd trust with your money, your legal troubles, your future. The face of a man who'd pushed Thomas Harper into a well and walked away without looking back. He took his position behind a wooden podium on the platform, surveyed the crowded hall, and smiled warmly. "My friends," he began, his voice carrying easily to the back rows. "Thank you for coming today. I know many of you have questions, have heard disturbing rumors, and deserve answers. That's why I've called this meeting, to address these concerns openly and honestly, in the spirit of transparency that has always guided my service to this community." He paused, letting the words settle. Ethan felt Marion's hand tighten in his. It has come to my attention that Mrs. Marion Harper, he gestured toward them with what looked like genuine sympathy, has been making serious accusations regarding her late husband's death. Accusations that, if true, would constitute murder and conspiracy. These are not small matters. They deserve serious consideration. Another pause. The room was absolutely silent. Mrs. Harper believes that her husband, Thomas Harper, was deliberately killed. That his death was not the tragic accident our investigation concluded, but rather a calculated murder designed to steal their property. She believes I was responsible, that I personally pushed a good man to his death for financial gain. He let that hang in the air, let people absorb the accusation in all its ugliness. Then he shook his head sadly. I understand grief. I lost my own wife and child many years ago. I know how grief can twist perception, can make us see malice where there was only misfortune, conspiracy where there was only tragedy. So I do not blame Mrs. Harper for her accusations. I pity her. I pity any woman who has suffered such loss that she cannot accept a simple, terrible truth, that sometimes good people die for no reason at all. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Ethan could feel the mood shifting, could see people nodding in sympathy with Edwards rather than Marion. The judge was good, better than good. He was masterful at this. However, Edwards continued, his voice hardening slightly, these accusations cannot go unchallenged. My reputation, my honor, my very livelihood depend on the trust of this community, so I must respond with facts rather than sympathy. He produced a folder from beneath the podium, opened it with deliberate care. Thomas Harper was struggling financially. This is documented fact. His bank statements, his outstanding debts, all available for public inspection. He was behind on his mortgage payments, behind on his taxes. His farm was failing through a combination of poor management and unfortunate circumstances. The well poisoning was a natural occurrence, contamination from mineral deposits, verified by independent analysis. Ethan watched Lily's face go pale. This was the man who'd killed her father, standing up there, lying with every breath, and she had to sit here and listen to it. Thomas became convinced that his financial troubles were someone else's fault. He began to believe in conspiracies, in coordinated efforts to destroy him. He started making wild accusations against various community members, myself included. It was, I'm sad to say, a pattern of paranoid delusion brought on by stress and financial desperation. Edwards looked directly at Marion now, his expression full of carefully practiced sorrow. On the day of his death, Thomas Harper was checking the well alone. No one else was present. He lost his balance, perhaps weakened by stress, perhaps distracted by his troubles, and fell. It was witnessed by his daughter, who was playing in the barn at the time. A 6-year-old child saw her father fall, and in her trauma, her young mind tried to make sense of the senseless by creating a narrative where someone was responsible, someone to blame. That's not true! Lily's voice rang out, high and clear. I saw you push him! The crowd murmured again, louder now. Edward's expression shifted to one of painful compassion. You see what I mean? A child traumatized by witnessing her father's death, her testimony twisted by grief and by those who would use her pain for their own purposes. He looked at Ethan. Enter Mr. Ethan Cole, a drifter with no ties to this community, no history here, no reason to care about Silver Creek or its people. Yet somehow he's convinced Mrs. Harper that her husband was murdered, that there's a grand conspiracy, that sending documents to territorial authorities will somehow, what, bring Thomas back? Restore their failing farm? Edward's voice rose with righteous anger. Or is it simpler than that? Is Mr. Cole perhaps a con artist who saw a vulnerable widow and her child as an opportunity? A way to extract money by playing on grief and desperation? Ethan started to stand, but Marion's hand on his arm stopped him. She was right. Reacting angrily would only prove Edward's point. I've made inquiries about Mr. Cole, the judge continued. Former deputy marshal out of Kansas. Lost his own family to fever and fell apart. Lost his badge. Lost his purpose. Spent 6 years drifting from town to town. And now he's attached himself to the Harper family, living at their farm, involving himself in their affairs. One has to ask, what does he hope to gain? Sympathy? Money? Or perhaps He paused delicately. The affection of a lonely widow? Marion's face flushed red. Around them, people were whispering again, and Ethan could hear the judgment in their voices. A widow taking up with a drifter. Not even a year and a half since Thomas died. Shameful. Those poor people. That poor child. Edwards had them. Without even presenting his so-called evidence, without refuting a single specific claim, he'd poisoned the well so thoroughly that anything they said now would be seen through the lens of grief and delusion and opportunism. However, Edwards said, and his voice softened to something almost kind, I am not a cruel man. I believe Mrs. Harper has been misled, that she is acting out of pain rather than malice. I believe Mr. Cole, whatever his true motivations, has convinced himself he's helping, and I believe young Lily Harper deserves a better life than what awaits her if this continues. He set down his folder and leaned forward, speaking directly to them. So I'm prepared to make an offer. Mrs. Harper, I will purchase your property at fair market value, well above what it would fetch at foreclosure. Enough money to relocate you and Lily to a good town with good schools, to start fresh somewhere your daughter won't have to carry the weight of all this tragedy. In exchange, you withdraw your accusations, acknowledge that your husband's death was accidental, and allow this community to heal. The crowd was nodding now. It seemed generous, reasonable, more than fair under the circumstances. And Mr. Cole, Edwards continued, you will leave Montana Territory and not return. You will cease any and all communication with Mrs. Harper and her daughter. You will take this opportunity to move on with your life and leave this family to rebuild theirs in peace. He spread his hands wide, magnanimous in victory. This is my offer, made publicly, witnessed by this entire community, fair and equitable to all parties. Accept it, and we all move forward. Refuse it, and... He paused. Well, the legal consequences for making false accusations against a territorial judge are severe, and I would be forced reluctantly to pursue those consequences to protect my own reputation and position. The threat was clear. Accept the deal or face legal destruction. Take the money and run, or stay and fight a battle they couldn't possibly win. Ethan looked at Marion. She was staring at Edwards with something that went beyond hatred, something cold and certain. Then she looked down at Lily, at her daughter's small face set in lines too hard for 8 years old. What do you think, baby? Marion whispered. Should we take his money and leave? Start fresh somewhere new? Lily was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood up, small and straight-backed, and looked directly at Judge Edwards. My papa was a good man, she said, her voice carrying in the silent hall. He didn't fall. He was pushed. I saw it happen. I told the truth then, and I'm telling the truth now. And no amount of money is going to make me say different. She sat back down, her hands shaking but her chin raised high. Marion stood next. My husband documented 17 families who lost everything to your schemes, Judge Edwards. He found the pattern, found the proof, found the truth. And you killed him for it. We sent that truth to Helena, to Denver, to Washington. You can threaten us all you want, offer us all the money in the territory, but the truth is already out there, already beyond your reach. Her voice strengthened, grew louder. So no, we don't accept your deal, we don't accept your lies, and we don't leave. This is our home, our land, and we're not going anywhere. The crowd erupted. Some people cheered, more than Ethan had expected. Others shouted angry objections. Edward's face went hard, the mask of compassion slipping to reveal something cold underneath. Then you leave me no choice, Mrs. Harper. Deputy Warren. But before Warren could move, the courthouse doors crashed open. A man stood silhouetted in the doorway, dust from a hard ride still clinging to his clothes. He was medium height, with dark hair and a scar cutting across his left cheek. The man who'd been looking for Ethan, the ghost from his past come to collect old debts. But he wasn't looking at Ethan. He was looking at Judge Edwards. Federal Marshal James Garrett, the man announced, his voice cutting through the chaos. I have warrants for the arrest of Judge Harrison Edwards on charges of murder, conspiracy, fraud, and illegal seizure of property. Judge Edwards, you're under arrest. The room exploded into noise and confusion. Edwards started to move, but 2 more men entered behind Garrett, both wearing marshal badges, both with guns drawn. Warren reached for his own weapon, but Garrett was faster, his revolver aimed steady at the deputy's chest. "Don't, Frank. It's over. We got your written confession 2 days ago. Came by special courier. Everything you told Cole about Edwards and Thomas Harper, signed and dated. That plus the documentation Mrs. Harper sent to 3 separate locations. You're done protecting him." Warren's hand froze. His face went gray as he realized what had happened. His own words, the confession Ethan had forced from him at gunpoint on the prairie, had reached the federal authorities before Edwards could suppress it. Edwards was backing toward the side door, but the marshals were already there, blocking his escape. He looked around the hall at the faces of people who'd feared him and served him and profited from him, seeking help that wasn't coming. "This is outrageous," he said, but his voice had lost its authority. "I'm a territorial judge. You can't just arrest me based on signed confessions, documented evidence, and testimony from 11 families you destroyed," Garrett interrupted. "We've been investigating you for 6 months, Judge, ever since the territorial governor received an anonymous tip about irregularities in land transfers. The Harper documentation just confirmed what we were already building." He produced heavy iron shackles from his coat. "You have the right to legal representation. You'll be transported to Helena for trial, but as of this moment, your authority in Silver Creek is terminated." The marshals took Edwards into custody while the crowd watched in stunned silence. As they led him past the front row, the judge's eyes met Lily's. For just a second, his mask dropped completely, and she saw what was really there: cold calculation and the fury of a man who'd lost everything he'd spent 15 years building. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "The trial will take months. Evidence can disappear. Witnesses can change their minds, or disappear themselves." Marshal Garrett jerked him forward. "Keep talking, Edwards. Every threat you make just adds to the charges." They led him out through the back, taking him to whatever temporary cell they'd arranged until transport to Helena could be organized. The crowd began to disperse, people spilling out onto Main Street, talking in loud voices about what they'd just witnessed. Ethan, Marion, and Lily sat frozen in their chairs, unable to quite process what had happened. Marshal Garrett approached them, his scarred face softening slightly. "Mrs. Harper. Mr. Cole. Can we talk somewhere private?" They ended up in the now empty courthouse hall, just the 5 of them: Garrett, his 2 fellow marshals, and the Harper family plus Ethan. The marshal pulled out a chair and sat backward on it, studying them with eyes that had seen too much. "First things first," he said. "Cole, you know me. Kansas City, 7 years ago. I was on patrol with your wife and daughter when the fever outbreak started. I'm the one who sent you the telegram." Ethan's world tilted sideways. He stared at the scar on Garrett's face, really seeing it now, and memory came flooding back. A young deputy marshal, barely 20 years old, nervous and earnest and trying so hard to do right. The man who'd sat with Sarah and Emma when they got sick, who'd stayed until the end when he could have run, who'd made sure they were buried proper before sending word. "James," Ethan whispered, "I didn't recognize you." "Been a while, and I've changed." Garrett touched his scar. "Got this breaking up a mining dispute 2 years back. But I never forgot what you did for me when I was starting out. Never forgot that you were a good lawman and a good man who got dealt a terrible hand. Why were you looking for me?" "Wasn't actually. Not until a month ago when your name came up in connection with our Edwards investigation. Deputy Warren mentioned a drifter named Cole helping the Harper widow, and I wondered if it might be you. Sent a writer to verify, and when he confirmed it, I knew we had something solid. You wouldn't attach yourself to a losing cause, Ethan. If you believed these people, believed their evidence, that meant there was truth here worth protecting." He looked at Marion and Lily. "Your documentation was excellent, Mrs. Harper. Detailed, specific, with supporting testimony. Combined with what we'd already gathered and Deputy Warren's confession, it's enough to put Edwards away for life. Maybe even a hanging, depending on how the trial goes." "Warren confessed?" Marion asked. "Wrote out everything and had it notarized in Copper Ridge the day after Cole here convinced him to cooperate. Station master. There is a retired federal marshal himself, recognized the significance of what Warren was saying, and made sure it got to us fast." Garrett stood, paced to the window. Edwards' operation was bigger than just Silver Creek. We've identified at least 40 properties across 3 territories acquired through fraud, intimidation, or worse. Dozens of families destroyed. The trial's going to be ugly and long, but justice will be served. Lily tugged on Garrett's sleeve. Will you make sure that he doesn't get away? That Papa gets justice? The marshal looked down at her, and something in his hard face gentled. I promise you, little miss. Harrison Edwards will answer for every crime he committed, including the murder of your father. After the marshals left to arrange Edwards' transport and begin processing the dozens of witnesses who'd come forward once they knew it was safe, Ethan walked Marion and Lily back to their horses. Main Street was still crowded, but the atmosphere had changed. People who'd avoided the Harpers for 18 months were approaching now, offering apologies, claiming they'd always suspected something was wrong, insisting they'd wanted to help but hadn't known how. Marion accepted their words with cool courtesy, but Ethan could see the anger beneath her composure. These people had abandoned her family when it mattered, had let Lily collapse in the street, had turned their backs on justice because it was easier than standing up to power. Their apologies now, after the danger had passed, rang hollow. They were almost to the horses when a woman stepped out of the crowd, Mrs. Brennan from the Mercantile, the one who'd initially refused to help Lily. Her face was tear-stained, her hands twisting together anxiously. Mrs. Harper, I need to say something, need you to know. She stopped, swallowed hard. My son died 5 years ago, worked for Edwards, discovered something he wasn't supposed to know, and died in what they called a riding accident. I knew it wasn't, but I was scared that if I spoke up, I'd lose everything else. So I stayed quiet, and I've hated myself for it every day since. She looked at Lily. When you fell at the well and I didn't help, that wasn't because I didn't care. It was because I'm a coward, because I chose safety over decency, and I'm so sorry. Marion's expression didn't change. Your apology doesn't give me back the 1.5 years we spent alone. Doesn't erase the fear my daughter lived with. Doesn't bring back my husband. I know it doesn't. But I want you to know that some of us, she gestured to a small group standing nearby, watching the exchange. We're not going to be silent anymore. We're going to testify at Edward's trial. We're going to tell the truth about what he did, what we saw, what we knew. It won't fix what's already broken, but maybe it'll help make sure nothing like this happens again. Lily stepped forward, her small hand finding Mrs. Brennan's weathered one. Papa used to say it's never too late to do the right thing. That courage isn't not being scared, it's being scared and doing it anyway. She squeezed the woman's hand. Thank you for finding your courage. Mrs. Brennan sobbed once, sharp and broken, then pulled herself together and nodded. She walked away, back to her store, back to a life that would now include the burden of testimony and the weight of truth-telling. Ethan helped Lily into her saddle, then turned to Marion. She was staring after Mrs. Brennan, her face unreadable. Are you all right? He asked quietly. I don't know. I thought, when this moment came, when Edwards was finally caught, I thought I'd feel vindicated, triumphant. Instead, I just feel... She paused, searching for words, tired, and angry that it took federal marshals and written confessions before anyone believed us, that we had to nearly die before anyone cared. But they do care now. That has to count for something. Does it? Where were they when Lily needed water? Where were they when I couldn't buy food because no one would extend credit? Where were they when we were sending those documents, risking everything with no guarantee anyone would listen? They were scared, just like Mrs. Brennan said. And we weren't? Marion's voice rose, sharp with 18 months of suppressed fury. You think we weren't terrified every single day? The difference is we didn't let fear stop us from doing what was right. They did. And now they want forgiveness for their cowardice just because it's safe to be brave. Ethan had no answer for that. She was right. The people of Silver Creek had failed the Harpers in every way that mattered, and their belated contrition didn't erase that failure. But he also understood fear, understood how easily it could paralyze, how the instinct for self-preservation could override moral obligation. He'd spent 6 years running from his own failures, letting fear of grief and guilt keep him from engaging with the world, until he'd seen Lily fall in the street and something in him had finally broken open. They rode back to the farm in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The sun was starting its descent toward the mountains when they arrived, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded Ethan of fire and blood and endings. Marshal Garrett had told them they'd need to stay in the territory for the trial, that their testimony would be crucial to securing a conviction. That meant weeks, maybe months, of reliving Thomas Harper's murder and the systematic destruction of everything he'd tried to protect. But it also meant seeing it through, finishing what Thomas had started, what Marion had continued, what Lily had witnessed and carried for 18 months. Justice was slow and imperfect and often incomplete, but it was still justice, still mattered, still worth the cost of achieving it. As they dismounted in the yard, Lily suddenly ran to the well, the poisoned well that had claimed her father's life. She stood at its edge, looking down into darkness. "Lily?" Marion called, worried. The girl turned back to them, and there were tears on her face, but she was smiling too. "I wanted to tell him," she said. "Tell Papa that we did it, that the truth came out, that the bad man is going to pay for what he did." Marion crossed to her daughter, wrapped her in a fierce embrace. Ethan hung back, giving them this moment, watching as grief and relief and love all tangled together in the space between mother and child. Then Lily reached out one hand toward him, beckoning. He came to them, and they stood together at the edge of the poisoned well where it had all begun, three people bound by loss and choice and the stubborn refusal to let injustice stand unchallenged. The battle wasn't over. Edwards would fight the charges, would use every resource at his disposal to avoid conviction. The trial would be brutal, the testimony painful, the outcome uncertain despite the evidence. But they would face it together, would stand in that courtroom and tell the truth no matter how many people tried to discredit or silence them. Because that's what justice required. Not perfection, not guaranteed victory, just the willingness to keep fighting, keep testifying, keep believing that truth mattered even when the world seemed determined to prove otherwise. And for now, in this moment, standing together as the sun set over Montana and the darkness gathered around them, that was enough. The trial began 6 weeks later in Helena, in a courthouse 3 times the size of the one in Silver Creek. Those 6 weeks felt both endless and too short. Time enough for Edward's lawyers to arrive from back east with their expensive suits and practiced smiles. Time enough for witnesses to be interviewed and depositions taken. Time enough for doubt to creep in during the long nights when Ethan lay awake in the barn, wondering if they'd really won or just postponed the inevitable. Marshal Garrett visited the farm twice during those weeks, bringing updates and preparing them for what was coming. The prosecution was strong, he assured them, built on Warren's confession and the documented evidence and testimony from nearly 20 families Edwards had destroyed. But Edwards' defense team was already working to undermine everything, claiming Warren had been coerced, that the documents were forgeries, that the whole case was built on the fantasies of unstable people seeking revenge for their own failures. "They're going to come at you hard," Garrett warned on his second visit, sitting at the kitchen table with coffee Marion had made. "Especially you, Mrs. Harper. They'll paint you as a bitter widow who can't accept that her husband died through his own carelessness. And Lily—" He stopped, looking uncomfortable. "They'll say she's too young to remember correctly," Marion finished, "that her memory's been corrupted by hearing me talk about murder for 18 months, that an 8-year-old can't be trusted." 9 now, Lily said quietly from the corner where she'd been pretending to read. "I had a birthday last week." Ethan felt something twist in his chest. Her birthday had come and gone, and none of them had thought to mark it, too consumed by preparation for the trial. Just another thing Edwards had stolen from this family, the ability to celebrate simple joys without the weight of his crimes pressing down on everything. 9 years old, Garrett amended gently. "And the defense will say that's still too young. But the prosecution knows what they're doing. They'll establish your credibility, show that your testimony has stayed consistent from the day it happened until now, demonstrate that children can absolutely be reliable witnesses when the event was traumatic enough to burn into memory." "Will I have to see him?" Lily asked. "In the courtroom?" "Yes. He'll be sitting at the defense table the whole time you're testifying. His lawyers will tell him to look sympathetic, maybe even sad. They'll try to make it seem like he's the victim here." Lily nodded slowly. "I can do it. I can look at him and tell the truth anyway." But her hands were shaking when she said it, and that night Ethan heard her crying in the loft, heard Marian's soft voice trying to comfort her. He stood in the barn doorway and looked at the stars and thought about all the ways the world broke children who deserved better. They traveled to Helena 2 days before the trial started, taking rooms in a modest boarding house near the courthouse. The territorial capital was bigger than anything Lily had ever seen, and despite everything, Ethan watched her eyes go wide at the paved streets and gas lamps and buildings that rose 3 and 4 stories high. "Papa would have liked it here," she said, as they walked past a bookstore with windows full of leather-bound volumes. "He loved books. Used to read to me every night before—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "Before?" Marian took her hand. "He'd be so proud of you, baby, of how brave you are." "I'm not brave. I'm scared." "Being scared and being brave aren't different things," Ethan reminded her, echoing the words he'd said weeks ago. "Your papa knew that. He was scared too, I bet, when he started investigating Edwards. But he did it anyway." They spent the evening going over Lily's testimony one more time, Garrett asking her questions in the same way the prosecutor would, preparing her for the rhythm of courtroom interrogation. She answered clearly and consistently, never wavering from what she'd seen that day at the well. But when Garrett started asking the questions the defense would pose, "Are you sure it was Judge Edwards? Could it have been someone else? Isn't it possible your father just lost his balance?" Lily's voice got smaller, less certain. "I know what I saw," she whispered, but doubt had crept into her tone. "That's what they'll do," Garrett explained gently. "They'll ask the same question 10 different ways, trying to make you second-guess yourself. You have to stay firm. Keep coming back to what you know, what you witnessed. Don't let them confuse you." After he left, Marian held Lily for a long time, rocking her like she was still small enough to fit in her mother's lap. Ethan stood at the window and watched Helena settling into night, lights coming on in windows all across the city, each one representing lives being lived without the weight of murder and conspiracy pressing down on them. He envied those people their ordinary problems. The courtroom was packed on opening day. News of Edwards' arrest had spread across the territory and beyond. A territorial judge accused of murder and land fraud made for sensational headlines. Reporters from Denver and San Francisco filled the gallery, pencils ready to capture every word for their papers. Edwards' former associates sat in tight clusters, their faces closed and wary. And scattered throughout were the families he'd destroyed, come to watch justice finally catch up to the man who'd ruined them. Edwards himself sat at the defense table looking dignified and wronged, every inch the respected jurist being persecuted by small-minded people who didn't understand the complexities of territorial law. His lawyers flanked him like guard dogs, expensive and aggressive, and already objecting to procedural matters before the trial even started. The prosecutor was a federal attorney named Charles Morrison, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a reputation for meticulous preparation. He'd spent hours with Ethan and Marian and Lily in the days before trial, going over every detail, building a case that was airtight as human effort could make it. But as Ethan watched Morrison lay out his opening argument, explaining to the jury the pattern of corruption and violence that Edwards had built over 15 years, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to go wrong, that despite the evidence and the witnesses and the documented crimes, Edwards would find a way to slip free. The first week of trial was procedural, establishing timelines, entering documents into evidence, laying groundwork. Boring but necessary. Lily sat between Ethan and Marian in the gallery, watching everything with those solemn gray eyes, occasionally asking whispered questions about what was happening. "Why does the judge keep stopping them?" she asked, when Morrison's questioning was interrupted by defense objections for the 5th time that afternoon. "Because the defense lawyers are trying to keep out evidence that hurts their case," Ethan explained quietly, "and the judge has to decide what's fair and what isn't." "Is he fair? The judge?" Ethan looked at the man presiding, Judge Catherine Whitmore, brought in from another district specifically because Edwards had too many connections in Helena. She was stern-faced and sharp-voiced, tolerating no nonsense from either side. "I think so. I hope so." The second week brought the family testimonies. One by one, people who'd lost their land to Edwards' schemes took the stand and told their stories. The Johnsons, who'd lost their farm after their barn burned and their son was falsely arrested. The Millers, forced off their property when their well was poisoned, the same method used on the Harpers. The Changs, immigrants who'd built a successful ranch only to have it stolen through fraudulent deed transfers they couldn't read because English wasn't their first language. Each story was heartbreaking. Each story followed the same pattern: Edwards identifying property he wanted, finding or creating leverage to force the owners out, acquiring the land through seemingly legal means while the displaced families had no recourse. The defense tried to discredit each witness, painting them as failures who blamed others for their own poor decisions. But Morrison was ready, producing documentation that showed these families had been thriving before Edwards targeted them, showing the pattern that no amount of deflection could hide. By the end of the second week, even Edwards's lawyers looked strained. The weight of evidence was crushing, undeniable, but they still had their ace to play, undermining the murder charge by discrediting the only eyewitness to Thomas Harper's death. Lily was scheduled to testify on Monday of the third week. Sunday night, she barely slept. Ethan could hear her moving around in the room she shared with Marion, could hear Marion's soft voice reading to her, trying to calm her enough to rest. He didn't sleep much either, kept thinking about all the ways this could go wrong, all the ways a 9-year-old girl could be broken down by experienced lawyers whose job was to make her look unreliable. Morning came too soon. They dressed in their best clothes, Marion in a dark blue dress that made her look older and steadier, Lily in a white pinafore that emphasized how young and small she was. Ethan wore his cleanest shirt and the jacket he'd bought specifically for the trial, trying to look respectable and trustworthy, instead of like the drifter Edwards's lawyers kept painting him as. The courtroom was even more packed than usual, word having spread that the child witness would testify today. Ethan felt anger rise in his throat at the spectacle of it, at people treating a child's trauma like entertainment. Morrison called Lily to the stand mid-morning. She walked up with her back straight and her hands clasped in front of her, looking impossibly small in the witness chair. The bailiff had to bring a box for her to stand on so she could see over the railing. "Please state your name for the record," Morrison began gently. "Lily Marie Harper." "How old are you, Lily?" 9 years old. I turned 9 last month." "And where do you live?" "The Harper Farm, 3 miles north of Silver Creek, with my mama and Mr. Cole." Morrison smiled at her, reassuring. "I'm going to ask you some questions about something that happened about a year and a half ago. If you don't understand a question, just tell me and I'll ask it differently, all right?" "Yes, sir." "On the day your father died, where were you?" "In the barn loft. I was playing up there. It was my special place. I could see everything from up there." "Could you see the well from the barn loft?" "Yes, sir. Papa was checking the well pump. It had been making funny noises, and he wanted to fix it before it broke completely." "Was anyone else there?" "Not at first, just Papa. Then the man came." "Can you describe the man you saw?" Lily's eyes flicked to the defense table, to Edwards sitting there watching her. She swallowed, but her voice stayed steady. "He was tall, had gray hair and a nice black coat. He walked up to Papa real quiet-like he didn't want to be heard." "What happened then?" "They talked. I couldn't hear what they said, but Papa seemed upset. He kept shaking his head. Then the man, he moved real fast, put both hands on Papa's back and pushed. Papa went into the well. I heard him scream. Heard the splash." Her voice cracked on the last word, but she kept going. "The man looked around to make sure nobody saw, but he didn't look up, didn't see me in the loft. Then he walked away. Just walked away like nothing happened." "Lily, do you see the man who pushed your father in this courtroom today?" "Yes, sir. He's sitting right there." She pointed directly at Edwards. "That's him. That's the man who killed my papa." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Whitmore's gavel cracked down hard. "Order! We will have order, or I will clear this courtroom." Morrison waited for silence, then continued. "You're very certain it was Judge Edwards you saw that day?" "Yes, sir. I saw his face clear as anything, and I heard Mama and Papa talking about him before, about how he wanted our land, wanted the water rights. I knew who he was." "Thank you, Lily. No further questions." The defense attorney who stood for cross-examination was a man named Blackwell, silver-haired and grandfatherly, the kind of lawyer who specialized in looking harmless while cutting witnesses to pieces. He approached the stand with a gentle smile. "Hello, Lily. I'm Mr. Blackwell. I just have a few questions for you. She nodded, wary. Now, you said you were playing in the barn loft. That's pretty high up, isn't it? Yes, sir. How far away would you say the well is from the barn? Maybe 50 feet? I'm not sure exactly. 50 feet. And you were up in the loft, which is what, another 10, 15 feet higher? So you were quite far away from the well when this happened. Is that fair to say? Lily hesitated. I could see fine. I have good eyes. I'm sure you do. But at that distance, on a bright sunny day, isn't it possible you might have made a mistake about what you saw? I didn't make a mistake. Well, let's think about it. You said the man walked up quietly. If your father and this man were talking, isn't it possible your father simply lost his balance and fell? And in your shock and grief, your mind created a narrative where someone pushed him? No, he pushed him. I saw it. You were 6 years old, Lily. 6. That's very young. And you just watched your father die in a terrible accident. Don't you think your memory might have... It wasn't an accident. Lily's voice rose, sharp with frustration. He pushed him. I saw it happen. Why won't anyone believe me? I'm not saying you're lying, sweetheart. I'm saying you were a traumatized child who... Objection. Morrison was on his feet. Counsel is badgering the witness. Sustained. Mr. Blackwell, rephrase or move on. Blackwell nodded smoothly. Lily, in the time since your father's death, your mother has talked a lot about Judge Edwards, hasn't she? About how she believes he was responsible? She believes it because it's true. But she's talked about it, in front of you, many times. Yes. And Mr. Cole, the man who's been living at your farm, he's talked about it too, hasn't he? About building a case against Judge Edwards? Mr. Cole has been helping us find justice for Papa. I see. So for the past several months, you've been surrounded by adults who believe Judge Edwards killed your father. Adults you trust and depend on. Isn't it possible that their certainty has influenced your memory? Made you more sure than you actually were? Lily's hands gripped the railing of the witness box. Ethan could see her knuckles white with pressure, could see her fighting to stay calm under the assault. My memory doesn't need influencing, she said, and her voice was cold now, older than 9 years. I know what I saw. I've known it every day for a year and a half, and no matter how many times people like you try to make me doubt myself, I won't, because Papa deserves the truth. And the truth is that man, she pointed at Edwards again, murdered him. Blackwell tried several more approaches, but Lily held firm. Every attempt to shake her testimony met the same response, clear, consistent, unshakable. Finally, he gave up and dismissed her. As Lily stepped down from the witness stand, she walked past the defense table. Edwards leaned forward slightly, his voice barely audible, but Ethan heard it from where he sat. Brave little girl, Edwards said, just like your father. Look where his bravery got him. Lily stopped. For a moment, Ethan thought she might react, might give Edwards exactly the emotional outburst he was hoping for. Instead, she looked at him with those gray eyes that had seen too much. You're going to prison, she said quietly, or you're going to hang. Either way, you lose. Papa wins. She walked back to her mother without looking at Edwards again. Marion pulled her close, whispering fierce praise. Ethan watched Edwards' face and saw something flicker there. Recognition, maybe, that this child wasn't going to break no matter what his lawyers threw at her. The prosecution rested the next day after calling Deputy Warren as their final witness. Warren took the stand looking 10 years older than when Ethan had first met him, his face haggard and gray. He'd been offered immunity in exchange for his testimony, a deal that had made Ethan's stomach turn, but which Morrison assured him was necessary. Sometimes you have to deal with lesser criminals to catch greater ones, the prosecutor had said. Warren's testimony puts Edwards at the scene of Thomas Harper's murder. Without it, we're relying solely on a child's eyewitness account, and juries can be reluctant to convict on that alone. Now Warren sat in the witness box and methodically destroyed any hope Edwards had of acquittal. He confirmed that Edwards had personally killed Thomas Harper, described how he'd been paid to ensure the investigation went nowhere, named names of other men who'd participated in Edwards' schemes, provided details only someone on the inside would know. The defense tried to discredit him, pointing out that he was testifying to save himself from prosecution. But Warren's confession had been written and notarized before he knew immunity was even a possibility, which gave it weight the defense couldn't undermine. By the time Warren stepped down, the case was as close to certain as a case could be. The jury had heard overwhelming evidence of Edwards's crimes. They'd seen the documentation, heard the testimony, watched a 9-year-old girl look her father's killer in the eye and tell the truth without flinching. The defense presented their case over the next 3 days, trying to create reasonable doubt through technicalities and alternative explanations. They brought in character witnesses who testified to Edwards's good works and charitable donations. They produced experts who claimed the land transfers were all legitimate business transactions. They even put Edwards himself on the stand, where he delivered a performance of wounded innocence that might have been convincing if not for the mountain of evidence against him. Marion testified near the end, calm and composed, detailing Thomas's investigation and the systematic campaign of intimidation that had followed. The defense tried to paint her as an unreliable witness consumed by grief, but she didn't give them anything to work with, just facts, delivered in a steady voice, impossible to dismiss. Ethan testified last, explaining how he'd come to be involved, what he'd discovered, how Warren's confession had been obtained. The defense tried to suggest he'd coerced Warren at gunpoint, which was technically true, but Morrison objected on grounds of relevance. However, the confession was obtained initially. Warren had later voluntarily provided a sworn statement to federal authorities, which made the circumstances of the first confession irrelevant. Closing arguments took an entire day. Morrison methodically walked through the evidence, connecting every piece, showing the jury that there was only one possible conclusion. Harrison Edwards was guilty of murder, fraud, conspiracy, and 2 decades of systematic corruption. The defense's closing was eloquent but hollow, asking the jury to ignore the evidence and focus on character, to give Edwards the benefit of doubt because of his position and service to the territory. Judge Whitmore sent the jury out to deliberate on a Friday afternoon. Ethan, Marion, and Lily waited in a small room near the courthouse, too nervous to go back to the boarding house, unable to do anything but wait. Hours passed. Evening came. The jury sent word they'd continue deliberating through the night if necessary. "Is that good or bad?" Marion asked Garrett, who'd stayed with them. "Hard to say. Could mean they're being thorough. Could mean there's disagreement." He didn't say what they were all thinking, that one juror sympathetic to Edwards could hang the jury, force a mistrial, drag everything out for months or years more. Lily had fallen asleep curled in a chair, exhausted beyond her ability to stay awake. Marion sat beside her, one hand stroking her daughter's dark hair. Ethan stood at the window watching night settle over Helena and thought about all the ways justice could still fail them. He must have dozed off standing there because Garrett's hand on his shoulder startled him awake. Gray morning light was filtering through the window. "Jury's back," Garrett said. They reached a verdict. The courtroom filled quickly, word spreading that a decision had been reached after 12 hours of deliberation. Edwards sat at the defense table looking composed, but Ethan could see tension in the set of his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the edge of the table. Judge Whitmore entered and everyone rose. She settled into her chair, surveyed the crowded room, and nodded to the bailiff. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreman stood, a rancher from outside Helena, weathered and serious. "We have, Your Honor. In the matter of the territory versus Harrison Edwards, on the charge of murder in the first degree, how do you find?" The foreman looked directly at Edwards. "Guilty." The courtroom exploded. Reporters rushed for the doors to file their stories. Edwards' supporters shouted objections. The families he'd destroyed wept and embraced. Judge Whitmore's gavel cracked like gunfire. "Order! We still have additional charges to address." The foreman read through the remaining verdicts. Guilty on conspiracy charges, guilty on fraud, guilty on illegal seizure of property, guilty on every count the prosecution had brought. Edwards sat frozen, his face ashen. His lawyers immediately began filing motions for appeal, objecting to procedures, demanding new trials. But Judge Whitmore cut through it all with sharp efficiency. "Mr. Edwards, please stand." He stood, no longer dignified but diminished, all his power stripped away by 12 ordinary people who'd chosen to believe the truth. "Harrison Edwards, you have been found guilty of crimes that strike at the very heart of justice and law in this territory. You used your position of trust to enrich yourself through violence, fraud, and intimidation. You murdered a good man who sought only to protect his family and community. You destroyed dozens of families for profit. And you did it all while hiding behind the authority of the very legal system you were sworn to uphold. She paused, letting the words settle. This court sentences you to death by hanging, sentenced to be carried out 30 days hence pending any appeals. In addition, all property and assets acquired through illegal means are to be returned to their rightful owners or their heirs. You are hereby stripped of your position as territorial judge and barred from ever holding public office again. May mercy find you in the next life, for you shall find none in this one. The gavel came down final and absolute. Guards moved forward to take Edwards into custody. As they led him past the gallery, he looked at Lily one last time. Whatever he saw in her face made him look away first, defeated utterly by a child who'd refused to let his lies stand. Outside the courthouse, in the bright morning sunshine, Marion and Lily and Ethan stood together while reporters shouted questions and well-wishers pressed forward to offer congratulations. Marshal Garrett fielded most of it, giving them space to simply breathe. "Is it really over?" Lily asked, her hand tight in Ethan's. "The trial is. Edwards will probably appeal, but with this much evidence, it won't go anywhere. He'll hang." Ethan looked down at her. "Your papa got his justice, honey. You made sure of that." "We all did," Marion said. She was crying, tears running down her face unchecked. "Thomas would be so proud. Of all of us." They made their way back to the boarding house through streets that seemed brighter somehow, air that seemed easier to breathe. The weight they'd been carrying for 18 months was finally lifting, leaving behind exhaustion and relief in equal measure. That night, Marion made a real dinner for the first time in weeks. Nothing fancy, just stew and bread, but it tasted like celebration. They ate together at the small table in Marion's room, talking about the trial, about what came next, about the future that had seemed impossible just weeks ago. "The farm needs work," Marion said, practical even in the aftermath of victory. "The fields need to be cleared and replanted. The well needs to be cleaned out or a new one dug. The house needs repairs." "We'll manage," Ethan said, then stopped, hearing himself. "We." When had he started thinking of the farm as his, too? Marion heard it as well. She looked at him across the table, something uncertain in her expression. "Ethan, what are your plans? Now that this is over, you're free to move on if you want. You've done more than anyone could have asked." He thought about it honestly. Thought about the 6 years he'd spent drifting, never staying anywhere, never letting himself care about anything enough that losing it would hurt. Thought about how empty that life had been, how hollow. Then he thought about Lily's hand in his as they walked from the courthouse. Thought about Marion's quiet strength through everything they'd endured. Thought about the farm and the work waiting there and the possibility of building something that mattered. "I'm not much of a farmer," he said slowly, "but I can learn. If you'd have me, if you want someone staying on to help." "Just someone?" Marion asked, and there was something in her voice that made his heart race. "Someone. A partner. He stopped, not sure how to finish. Lily helped him out. "A father," she said matter-of-factly. "You've been acting like one anyway. Might as well make it official." Ethan looked at this child who'd been through so much, who was offering him a place in her life despite having every reason to keep her heart closed to loss. "I'd be honored, Lily, if that's what you want. If your mama—" "Ethan Cole," Marion interrupted, and now she was smiling through fresh tears. "Are you asking to stay, to be part of this family?" "I reckon I am, if you'll have me. Not trying to replace Thomas. Nobody could do that. But as—" She crossed the small room and took his hands in hers, cutting off his stumbling words with a clarity he couldn't manage. "Thomas is gone, and I loved him with everything I had. But he'd want me to keep living, want Lily to have a good life, want us to find happiness where we can. And you've stood with us when no one else would, protected us, believed in us. That's not nothing, Ethan. That's everything. So you're saying—" "I'm saying yes. Stay. Help us rebuild the farm. Be Lily's father if she'll have you. And maybe, when enough time has passed, when it feels right, be my husband too." The words hung in the air between them. A promise and a possibility, and a future Ethan had stopped believing in 6 years ago when fever took his first family. He thought about Sarah and Emma, about how they'd want him to be happy, to live instead of just surviving. "I'd like that," he said quietly. "All of it. More than I can say." Lily made a sound that might have been approval or might have been disgust at adult sentiment, but she was smiling when she said, "Does this mean we can stop calling you Mr. Cole now? Because that's getting awful formal for family." They laughed, all three of them, and the sound filled the small room with something that felt like hope. They returned to Silver Creek a week later, taking their time on the journey, stopping to rest when Lily got tired, enjoying the freedom of not running from anything for the first time in months. The town had changed in their absence. Or maybe they'd changed and were seeing it differently. People who'd avoided them before now nodded greetings. Mrs. Brennan came out of the mercantile to apologize again and offer credit for whatever they needed. The new acting judge, a fair-minded man brought in from another district, met with Marion to discuss returning properties to the families Edwards had displaced. The farm was exactly as they'd left it, weathered and worn but still standing. They spent the first day just walking the property, taking inventory of what needed doing. The list was long, but not impossible. With three of them working together, with time and effort, and the compensation money the territorial government had promised for what the Harpers had endured, they could make it work. That evening, as the sun set over Montana, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Ethan stood at the well with a bucket and rope. The water was still poisoned, still undrinkable, but Marshal Garrett had sent word that federal funds were being allocated to clean it out and restore it properly. "Thinking about him?" Marion asked, coming to stand beside him. "Thinking about a lot of things. About how this is where it all started, where Thomas died, where Lily saw the truth, where everything changed. And now it gets to be something different. Not a place of death, but a place of, what? New beginnings?" Something like that. Ethan dropped the bucket into the darkness, heard it splash far below. "Thomas was brave. I hope I can live up to that." "You already have. Every day you've stayed, every choice you've made to protect us, that's been brave too." She leaned against him just slightly, and he put his arm around her shoulders. "He'd like you, I think, Thomas. He'd appreciate that Lily and I found someone good. I'll try to be worthy of that, of all of this." Inside the house, Lily was lighting lamps against the gathering dark. Through the window, Ethan could see her moving around, making the place ready for the night. Making it home. "We should get inside," Marion said. "Help her with dinner." In a minute, Ethan pulled up the bucket, poured the poisoned water onto the ground where it darkened the dust. "Just wanted to make a promise first. To Thomas. That I'll take care of them. That I'll stand with them no matter what comes. That his sacrifice won't be forgotten." The words hung in the evening air, settling over the farm like a benediction. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the rising moon. The wind pushed through the sage, carrying the smell of rain that might come tonight or might wait until morning. They walked back to the house together, to lamplight and warmth, and Lily's voice asking if anyone wanted to help her make biscuits for supper. The work ahead was hard, but the burden was shared now, distributed across 3 sets of shoulders instead of 2. The trial had ended with a verdict, but their story, the real story of healing and rebuilding and learning to hope again, was just beginning. 6 months later, on a clear spring morning with wildflowers blooming across the prairie, Ethan and Marion were married in a simple ceremony at the farm. The new preacher from Silver Creek officiated. Marshal Garrett stood as witness. Lily held Marion's bouquet, wildflowers she'd picked herself from fields that were green again, irrigated by the newly cleaned well that now ran clear and cold. The town came, nearly all of it, people who'd failed the Harpers before, but were trying now to make amends through small kindnesses and steady support. Mrs. Brennan brought a cake. The blacksmith gave them a new iron gate he'd forged for the entrance to the property. Family after family that Edwards had destroyed brought gifts and good wishes, united by their shared survival and determination to build something better from the ashes of what had been. As Ethan and Marion exchanged vows, Lily stood between them, one hand in each of theirs. The preacher had suggested she might want to stand to the side, but they'd all agreed. This wasn't just a marriage of two people, but the formal recognition of three becoming family. "I promise to love and protect you both," Ethan said when it was his turn to speak. "To stand with you in hard times and celebrate with you in good ones. To be a husband to Marion and a father to Lily, not to replace what was lost, but to build something new and good and lasting." Marion's vows were simpler, but no less meaningful. "I promise to trust you, to work beside you, to build this life together. And I promise to remember that love doesn't diminish when shared, it multiplies. Thomas will always be part of our story, but you're part of our future, and I'm grateful for that." Lily had insisted on her own vow. "I promise to not be too much trouble," she said solemnly, which made everyone laugh. "And to remember that family isn't just blood. It's who shows up, who stays, who fights for you when things get hard. You showed up, Mr. Cole. You stayed. So you're family now, that's all." The reception lasted into the evening, people lingering as the sun set and stars began to appear. Someone produced a fiddle, and there was dancing in the yard, laughter that rang out across the fields that were coming back to life. Late in the night, after most of the guests had gone home, Ethan found himself standing at the well again. But this time Marion and Lily were with him, the three of them looking down into water that reflected starlight. "You know what I think?" Lily said, her voice soft in the darkness. "I think Papa would say we did good, that we finished what he started and built something better from it." "I think you're right," Marion agreed. "And I think he'd tell us it's all right to be happy now, that we've earned it." Ethan pulled them both close, these two people who'd become his reason for staying in one place, his motivation to stop running from the past and start building a future. The well that had been poisoned was clean now. The fields that had been dead were growing. The house that had felt haunted by loss was filling with the sound of life and love and hope. Justice had been served. Harrison Edwards had hanged 2 months earlier, still protesting his innocence, still certain his appeals would save him right up until the moment the trapdoor dropped. His properties had been returned to their rightful owners. His network of corruption had been dismantled. The territorial government had implemented new oversight to prevent anyone from accumulating that kind of unchecked power again. But more important than Edward's fate was what had happened here, on this small farm at the edge of Silver Creek. A family destroyed had been rebuilt, different than before, patched together from loss and choice and stubborn determination, but whole nonetheless. A widow who'd lost everything had found the strength to fight back and win, had found partnership again with someone who understood that grief and love could coexist. A child who'd witnessed murder had found justice and peace, had found a father who chose her rather than being obligated by blood, had learned that the truth was worth defending no matter how hard the battle. And a drifter who'd spent 6 years running from his own pain had finally stopped running, had found something worth staying for, had discovered that family could be built as well as born into. As they stood together under the Montana stars, the future stretched out before them, full of ordinary challenges and simple joys, crops to plant, animals to tend, a home to maintain, a life to live. It wouldn't always be easy. There would be hard winters and crop failures and setbacks that couldn't be predicted or prevented. But they'd face it together, these three people bound by choice and love and the knowledge that they'd already survived the worst and come through it intact. "Come on," Marion said finally, turning toward the house. "It's late, and we have work tomorrow." But Ethan lingered one more moment, Lily's hand still in his, looking at the farmhouse with lamplight glowing warm in the windows. 6 months ago, this place had been a symbol of everything that was wrong with the world. Injustice rewarded, cruelty unchallenged, the powerful crushing the weak without consequence. Now it was home. "Mr. Cole?" Lily tugged his hand. "You coming?" He smiled down at her, at this brave child who'd looked a killer in the eye and refused to be silenced. "Yeah, honey, I'm coming." They walked back together, leaving the well and its dark memories behind, moving toward light and warmth and the life they were building together from the ruins of what had been lost. Behind them, the Montana wilderness stretched vast and indifferent, beautiful and harsh in equal measure. But ahead was home and family and a future they'd fought for and earned. And that, Ethan thought as he stepped through the door into lamplight and the smell of coffee still warm on the stove, was more than enough. More than he'd ever thought to find again. It was everything. The door closed behind them, shutting out the night. Inside in the house that Thomas Harper had built and that they would maintain in his memory, the work of living continued, simple, ordinary, precious. A family gathered around a table, plans made for tomorrow, stories shared about the day just ended. This was what justice looked like after the verdict was read and the sentence carried out. Not dramatic or headline-worthy, just people trying to build good lives from the wreckage of bad circumstances. Just survivors choosing hope over bitterness, choosing to believe that the world could be better than it had been. The town that had looked away learned to see again. The well that had held death now held life. And three people who'd been broken separately found wholeness together. In the end, that was the victory that mattered most. Not Edward's hanging for his crimes, though that mattered too. But this ordinary evening in a farmhouse in Montana, three people who'd become family making plans and sharing love and believing in tomorrow. This was what they'd fought for. This was what Thomas Harper had died trying to protect. And this simple, hard-won, precious life was the legacy that would endure long after Harrison Edwards was forgotten. The lamp burned late into the night, a beacon of light against the darkness, a promise that some things were worth fighting for, worth dying for, worth living for. And in the morning, when the sun rose over the Montana prairie, they would wake and work and build their future one day at a time, together.